speaking yet. I'll get there. Let's start up once this intro screen stops. Hang on. Hello everyone, how y'all doing? Welcome to the live stream. Glad to see everybody in chat. Everyone from all around the world. Appreciate you being here. It's good to do this. It feels good to be. You have to excuse a little bit of coughing perhaps as part of this, but it's good to get cracking and do this sort of stuff. I've been working hard on a bunch of things, but I've been also remiss in doing these live streams. I enjoy doing them, so. Yeah, good to see everyone, people from all around the world. I appreciate everybody that is probably here that probably participated in the poll that I put up about what's the best time to do these things. I know it's hard to find a time that works for everyone, but, you know, we do what we can. And I'll try and rotate times here and there as we go. And, you know, I'll do what I can to make it. But after all, the recordings, I do keep them up on the website. I don't just do them live and let them drop. They're usually there for all of time after that. So I see people coming in from everywhere in the chat. So yeah, cheers. I've got the chat on the screen. I know the chat is in the YouTube window below, so people can see it. I know some people can stay for a while, some people can't. It's all good. Appreciate any time you can spend here. I will. I've got a few things planned for today. Some of you may know what I am going on, and of course, I will always stop for super chats, which are much appreciated. I've had a couple already. Shermanator's jumped in with a couple. Thanks, Shermanator. He's a long-time supporter of the channel. I very much appreciate it. And it looks like one just rolled by here. Let me find my mouse. Justin Wardell. Challenging Shermanator to a donation battle. I heartily endorse that idea. Thank you, Justin, for the $5. That's awesome. I appreciate anything. You know, I appreciate just people tuning in and watching it. You know, it all helps me out. It's all great. Got a few things planned for today. We'll see how long we go. I really have no idea how long these things are going to go. Could be an hour and a half, could be 3 hours. We'll see how it goes. I do, as some of you probably know, want to get into the main topic that I have for today, which is really a review of the latest attack on Graham Hancock's work in the Society for American Archaeology, in their latest sort of trade rag, if you like, whatever it's called. It was after I had to say I really wanted to say my piece about this, having read it and being kind of shocked by the tone that it has, and to me it's sort of it's the latest in what has been a pretty consistent series of attacks, and the latest in the same series of tactics that typically get used against guys like Graham Hancock. but we'll get into that when we get there. But I want to go through a little bit of news. There's a few articles that have been really interesting lately. I do want to do some Q&A and get into the chat. I've got a couple things, a couple questions and comments that have come from email and my patrons on Patreon. But I will also engage in chat and try and address these questions. I'll stop for super chats and stuff, and then I'll try and directly, get into the chat a bit later on. And then if we have time after that, I would love to show you just the raw footage from my Doom, because that's kind of the videos that I've been working on lately. The last video on the channel was the part 1 of my look into my Doom. I'm working on part 2. If you saw my community post, I was really trying to get part 2 out before I did this live stream, but I just couldn't do it. I was working flat out on it. So first of all, been flat on my back for a couple of weeks. The flu's just belted me around pretty badly. It's been a couple of years since I've been sick, and I think what happened, my wife traveled to Australia for her job for a week, came back, sort of brought some nice exotic Australian flu back, which then I caught, and it's knocked us both around a little bit. It's been a few years since I've been sick like this, so it's never a good experience, but getting better, just lingering kind of chest cold, but I'm able to do more work now. But anyway, I was working on this video hard, and I couldn't quite get it done. As usual, things take longer than I think they will, and I will be, after this stream, I'll take a little break. Once we're done here, I am going to go onto Twitch afterwards and be editing live afterwards, so usually a little more casual and whatnot. All Metal Mike, $5 super chat. Great to see you from New Jersey. All Metal Mike, cheers, man. Thank you for the $5. Good to see you too. Thanks for joining the chat. I appreciate it. I'm just reading the chat now, but I've got a lot planned going into the new year, and I am working on a bunch of different videos. As always, I'm trying to improve the rate at which I publish stuff, but I'm doing it as much as I can. I'm working on it flat out, pretty much. That's all I've been doing this year, and got a lot to do going forward. I got a lot of irons in the fire in terms of videos right now, but the next one's going to be my Doom Part 2. After that, we'll get into some other interesting things. Yeah, it could be Australian flu indeed, but getting a little better. You'll just have to excuse the... I have a cough button here too. You'll have to excuse the quality of my voice. That was the other problem. I actually lost my voice for a while, so that makes it hard to do any recording or anything like that. But let's get into it. There's a couple of things that I wanted to start with before we dive into the Society for American Archaeology stuff, which is going to be a lot of fun. Could be pretty spicy. We'll see how it goes. I've got a fair bit to say on that. I know I can tell from the chat that a lot of you have read this article. I think there's a link down below in the description for this. If you haven't seen it, you can find a link to review that for yourself. Just a quick question from Justin Wardell. I wonder if I can donate using Google Play Currency. If it gives me the option, would it do anything for you? But I have no idea what Google Play Currency is. I appreciate any donations of anything. So, it's yeah. Look, I'm not. I just click the button, and I don't really know how it works in the back end. Google takes their chunk of it all. That's kind of the price for the infrastructure they provide. Gree888, $10, number one fan. Thanks very much. Cheers for the super chat. That's very generous of you. Cheers. Could I raise the volume a bit of my voice? Let me know if that's the issue. I do have. I will do this real quick just because I've been trying to get this right for a while here. I do have some gain on here. What I'll do is turn it up a little more. Try that. I've just added some gain to the voice. If not, you have a volume dial there as well. You have to crank it up. There shouldn't be anything playing much louder than my voice, other than maybe some of the soundboard stuff, which I have here. You may have heard, if you caught the pre-stream couple of videos, there's I have a few little...
And you've been to Giza, though?
No, I've never been to Giza.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. I have a few little tools and toys to play with on the soundboard here. I'm doing my best to control things through it all. Cheers. Greetings from Queensland. Hey, Chris. Good to see you. Thanks, Ian. I think it sounds good. I recorded and listened to it, tried to make it, see if it sounded right. I think it sounds okay. Let's jump into, not this yet. What we will get into first is this. This is something I wanted to talk about. I hadn't mentioned it on my channel. I think many of you will be aware of this. Light is a bit bright on me. I can adjust that. There we go. Turn that down a couple dials. This is something that I think many of you are aware of. There's been some recent news about the new chambers that they have found inside of the Great Pyramid, or I guess they've confirmed their findings from... Shame on you. Shame on you! I love that drop. They've confirmed the findings that they had from a couple of years ago. So this whole scan pyramid project was something that started a couple of years ago using modern techniques. This is something I'm massively in favor of, using sort of our modern scientific techniques to get new analysis on these sites. And in this case, what they did was a bunch of different detections of cosmic rays, muon detectors, a few other different things. In fact, if you want to have a look at some of the pictures of what they did, I have them here. These are pictures from NEXT. He posted them on Twitter. He's another content creator. He does a lot of tours and does a lot of trips. This is actually looking inside the Queen's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Not many people get in here. I'm planning a trip for end of next year. I haven't announced anything yet, but I'm working on the itinerary. Part of that trip will be... You lost your connection. Can I repeat everything you said for the last 3 minutes? You can go back and look. I'm not going to do that just yet. But I am planning a trip, and you don't normally get access to the Queen's Chamber or the subterranean chamber. When you go to Giza, you buy a general admission ticket. They have those doors locked. Where you get into is kind of the ascending passageway, Grand Gallery, and the King's Chamber. But in here in the Queen's Chamber, and there's sort of at the end of where the offset little triangular altar, I guess, or just there's the shape at the end of the Queen's Chamber it's offset in the chamber, but in here there's a door at the end of it as well, a little passageway that goes in there. I've never been in there, that's always locked. But you can see they've got some gear set up in here, and it's all sort of high-tech modern gear, which is pretty cool. Same thing in the subterranean chamber, which is this image here with NEXT in it. And they've got a bunch of gear running down there that's covered. And so essentially what it's doing is you know, it's looking at detecting cosmic rays and I guess it's either backscatter or lack of cosmic rays as they go through voids and then solid material as it passes through the pyramid. So doing an analysis of sort of density, if you like, and what they can tell from these pyramid scans is really where there is a lack of density. So they did this a couple of years ago. They were running all these tests, and they came out with this announcement that they found these chambers. There was a void inside above the Grand Gallery, and then one above sort of or next to the main entrance. And it's fairly speculative. If I remember, this was about 2 years ago, and if you recall, there were a bunch of archaeologists at the time just came out and poo-pooed it, and they're like, this can't be the real, because you know they have the story of how all these what these chambers are for, right? In the Great Pyramid, it's all. Half of it was a mistake. They changed their mind halfway through constructing the thing. That's the reason for the Queen's Chamber, because they built that as the original burial chamber for the pharaoh, and then he said, you know what, I don't like it. There'll be another chamber up here, and that was apparently the reason for making the Grand Gallery and then the King's Chamber, which is just a bunch of nonsense. You don't make monuments like this without detailed planning, and I don't think you're able to change designs like this on the fly when you're talking about something that's 6 million tons. And all sorts of ungodly levels of complexity in it. It seems crazy. Lyra, 2112, $9.99. Cheers. Thanks for the super chat. Figured it out. Cheers, Ben. Thanks for sharing your awesome research with us. I'm pleased to do that, and thank you for the super chat. That's great. And Ian, yeah, the channel is spelled NEXT, ANYEXTEE. He's I haven't met him personally, but we've had a bunch of interactions back and forth. I know he does a lot of tours. He's authored books. He's done some speaking events. He's friends with Chris Dunn, and I actually want to, through him, probably meet Chris Dunn. I know he spoke to Chris about me and about the couple of videos that I'd done that had involved Chris. So I through him, I'd like to actually get a hold of Chris Dunn and perhaps have him on the podcast one day. I think that'd be great. I've got a lot to ask. I really admire Chris Dunn's work, as you know, if you've seen any of my videos. But so the interesting thing that happened here with the scan pyramids is that they've basically done another set of tests, and they found more that's in here. Let me just run this video for a second.
Discovery at the very heart of the pyramid. They detected above the Grand Gallery a previously unknown cavity at least 30 meters long. They named it SPBV, Scan Pyramid's Big Void. It's the second important discovery the researchers have made after the announcement in October 2016 of a corridor situated behind the gigantic chevrons of the North Face. The level of confidence of these discoveries is more than 5 sigma. In other words, it's 1 in 3.5 million that these findings are by chance.
So, pretty solid, right? The one in basically, given this second test, there is undoubtedly voids inside the Great Pyramid, which to me makes sense. And the interesting implication for this is that it kind of ruins everybody's theories, and to some extent even some modern theories about this being a water pump or this or that or some sort of thing. My personal opinion is that the pyramids at Giza and a lot of the other sites, Abu Rawash, Zawet Al Ayran, some of these other things, can't hear you. No, I think most people can hear me. I think most of these things are functional. They have some functional nature. It may all be part of one giant mechanism or machine or something. I just don't think we have the right perspective to really frame that up and describe it yet, right? I talk about this a bunch in my podcasts and in my research because it's analogous to going back in time with an iPhone and trying to show it to somebody back there. It's difficult to explain what an iPhone does unless you have an understanding of all the concepts that are involved in it, right? You can't make an iPhone, I can't make one, but you have to understand what a touchscreen is and video and all these other things. All of those things you have to have those in place to even comprehend what this thing is. And I think we're lacking some of those fundamental principles when it comes to looking at some of the true mysteries of ancient Egypt and elsewhere. And, xenic surface waves and all of the new methods of electromagnetic transmission, some of the very fringe areas of modern science, I think, are starting to expose some of that to us. And certainly as we go forward in time, we're going to learn more and more. So this is, I really like this research. And Zahi Hawass was, he was, I love this.
Because I don't believe in radar.
Don't believe in radar. He came out and said, this isn't a new discovery, there's nothing here. There's clearly something here. I'm glad the guy doesn't really have the keys to control all of the research on the plateau. Seems like they're actually opening up the screws a little bit and letting this happen. And I actually think they should take this technique and apply it to a whole bunch of these other monuments and constructions. Like Mydoom's a good example. In fact, in the next video, and once we get to Mydoom at the end of this live stream, maybe we can talk a bit about it. There's good evidence. Petrie found good evidence that there are other chambers in there. Another super chat. Jay Richens, £2. Seeing the bricked up, thanks for the £2. Cheers. Seeing the bricked up door outside the Serapeum. I assume you're referring to Brian Forrester's video, his latest piece on the Serapeum. I have, and it's an interesting doorway. That actually, from what I understand, leads down. It's the passageway that's over to the side of the Serapeum. I believe that leads to what they call the lesser galleries, and it's an interesting story because this is where they found the actual sarcophaguses in these lesser galleries, and it's clearly like if the Serapeum, these huge grand tunnels, beautiful work. You could drive a car down them, but the lesser galleries are very crude, obviously of a different level, and inside them they found wooden sarcophagus with bulls in it, and that's kind of how they relate the whole bull thing to the Serapeum. And it doesn't actually connect up with the Serapeum. It runs alongside it, or just underneath it, or above it, and I believe that's where that goes. But for sure, they may have bricked it up because it's unstable or something, or it could be again hiding stuff. There's plenty of locked doors in all these areas. If you've seen my video on the Serapeum, you know at the end of the tunnels there's a shaft that's about this high. Yusuf makes a joke about the Apis rats. Being down there, and they've never, as far as I know, never explored it. You can shine a torch at the end of the Serapeum down this passageway full of rubble and trash, but it keeps on going as far as like a powerful torchlight will show. And there's so many spaces that seem to me just great candidates for like university robotics programs to go and explore these things. Same as in the shafts in the Great Pyramid, stuff like that. Typically the research progresses at a snail's pace because guys like Zahi for a long time have always controlled the release of information, and they want to be so tightly involved in the development of all these programs such that they can take credit for it. He takes credit for all of the robotics work that has happened there. He they threw Rudolf Gantenbrink out because he did something that they didn't want in terms of exploring somewhere they didn't want him to go into and whatever. It's crazy. Let me just look at chat for a second here. Drain the deserts. Well, it was when it comes to draining the deserts, and in fact, my Doom's a good example of this. There's so much under the sand. So much under the sand. There's everything's, and it just unless you maintain it too, it gets buried. It just reburies itself, and that's one of the things I'm looking at my Doom, is they actually cleared off the causeway and everything. Ground penetrating radar, sure. There's lidars from above. They should be using ground penetrating radar and a bunch of other techniques for these places. But unless they keep it up, the sand just reclaims it, and the sand reburies it over time. This is just what happens. It's one of the issues with trying to actually keep this stuff out. It's one of the issues with the erosion story of the Sphinx too, right? It's only been in relatively modern times that we've actually kept the Sphinx out of the sand. Like normally it's buried up to its neck, so it's really hard to understand how the walls of the enclosure and the body of the Sphinx has been subject to sand and wind erosion when you give it any length of time at all, and the sand just fills that pit up. How do you get wind erosion when the thing's buried up to its neck for thousands of years on end? It really hasn't been exposed for that long. It's one of the other reasons why it's most likely water erosion, as Shock says, right? J.R. Philippe, $10 Canadian. Thank you very much. Appreciate the super chat. He says, mainstream archaeology mirrors mainstream news. The audacity of those turning cheek to facts in order to maintain their one-sided views is stunning. I absolutely agree. That's well said. It really is. And we'll get into some of those details. Let me turn that song off. Anyway, so I did just want to comment on these chambers inside the Great Pyramid. I think it's excellent news. I really hope they get in there and explore it. I know Matt at the Ancient Architects channel's done some really good reviews of it, and he's made the point that we could just drill a small hole inside those chevrons that are at the actual main entrance to the pyramid and stick a camera in there and see and look into this void. It's not just really destructive. You put a little tiny hole in it. That would be one of the easiest steps to do, and it's just I think that they do these things, you just never hear about it. There's a lot of stuff that happens that you just never hear about. And there's all sorts of evidence for it. For example, and in the video of my Doom, if you look at my last video on my Doom, as we're panning around in that megalithic chamber underneath the mastaba where the granite box is, you look at all the blocks that are laying around. They have drill holes, and they're modern drill holes. Like there's been people in there drilling, doing work, and I could find no reference to any of that sort of testing. I know for a fact that in a lot of tombs in the Valley of the Kings, I mean, these are ideal climate-controlled environments for artifact storage. They use those tombs they take and they find stuff. They just put it back into other tombs and lock the doors. Like that's where they keep a lot of this stuff. I think they find so much as well that they just don't have the room to store it. This is one of the reasons they're opening this gigantic new museum, which I'm actually looking forward to seeing. And I hope they put a lot more stuff on display, because there are just warehouses full of stuff that they can't, obviously you can't show it all in the Cairo Museum. It's not the biggest museum in the world, but it's a real thing. Like there's tons of work that happens. I mean, anecdotal evidence for digging under the Sphinx. There's a great story that I've heard from people that live in Egypt a long time and like at the Giza Plateau that know how this worked. There was allegedly, this is a story, secondhand, it's hearsay, right? But I'll tell you the story. There was a concert that they were having at the Sphinx. They do this occasionally. They throw a concert. They do. They put scaffolding, and so they actually built a stage over the pores of the Sphinx. And they did this for a week or two before they were setting up. It was all covered up, and this was before they put the boardwalk down. That's there now, and apparently this happened for a couple of weeks before this one night event or a weekend event or whatever it was. And there were trucks coming and going, full of dirt and things, and you put a big stage and a scaffolding and you cover all that area up, and it was just open. Who knows what they were doing for a couple of weeks. I think there's a lot of the thinking was that there was a lot of work and digging work going on there, using this as a distraction or as a way to cover that area up and just do it while the public were there, because apparently he was telling me that, you know, there were trucks full of rubble and stuff going to and from the site, which is interesting. If you're just building a stage over it, why are you bringing trucks full of rubble away from this? And this was, you know, decades ago. You know, back in the day when Edgar Cayce Foundation was looking at all that stuff, whole other kettle of fish when it comes to Mark Lehner, Zahi Hawass. The Cayce Foundation's a really interesting, real interesting can of worms. Papa Bear 001, $10. Thanks very much. Cheers, man. Appreciate the super chat. Thanks for joining. I hope it's good. There's a few other people chatting. What would the ancient Egyptians have thought of the Great Pyramids after they had been built? Did any records remain that they were just lost to time and weren't available to us? You know, there's not a lot of direct evidence that they built them. They certainly never talked about building them. There's, you know, one line on a stele that references Khafra building the Sphinx or maintaining the Sphinx is another interpretation. So most people think that he actually repaired the Sphinx, but that one little space in one stele is pretty much why they attribute him with building it. Whereas it seems to me more likely that he was actually repairing it. Hard to say. There's not a lot of evidence that they built it. And certainly there's plenty of records that have been lost to us. I mean, the Library of Alexandria was a great tragedy, right? There was... we lost a ton of stuff there. And who knows how much other things that have been found that have been contrary to, you know, kind of the mainstream story that get covered up because they don't like the what it has an implication for. Just like this stuff in the Great Pyramid, right? It has a huge implication for the idea that this is a tomb. All of a sudden, this is a much more complex structure now. You've got and also a massive void, like this 30+ meter long chamber. That's a huge chamber. That's like almost equivalent to the Grand Gallery. I mean, it's a big chamber. You know, there's other. I went down the path. This is something that. It's something that I'm investigating as part of my resonance video, this long overdue resonance thing. But I tried to get a hold of this guy. There was a sound engineer that went in there to do some testing on. It had nothing to do with ancient. It was resonance testing and like sound testing inside the Great Pyramid. It was a part of a National Geographic special something long time ago. This was, I think, the 80s or 90s. And, you know, he had all these tools and they got into all these chambers, including the upper chambers, the relieving chambers, the spaces above the King's Chamber, which you need like a series of ladders to get right up into the corner of the Grand Gallery to get in there. And he found that they had been digging up there. This is where that rumor, if you remember back in the day, got out about chips of limestones and bags of limestones. They dug entire tunnels and dug into new spaces. And he talks about it in an interview. I actually went and found it. It was an interview with Richard Hoagland on his radio show from the mid-90s. And I went and dug this up. It's part of the research that I'm doing. Really interesting show. Managed to find the original source material for this. This guy won't ever talk about it. I tried to reach him through a number of different mechanisms. Doesn't want to talk about it. It's fine. But really interesting story, right? And if you remember, if some of you may remember that there was some controversy about them digging and doing stuff in the Great Pyramid that caused he's like, no, we're not doing anything. So stuff like that. There's a lot of this sort of thing that does go on. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're already. You'll find that the Great Pyramid may get closed for maintenance. They'll call it maintenance. They'll call it like renovation or something. They'll be in there hammering away and trying to find these chambers if they haven't already done it. Ben's got a good sore coughitis. Yeah, I do. Miguel hitting me up in the chat. Recat structure video about being Atlantis or not. When? Well, Grateful Dead played at the pyramids too. Yeah, you know who else played at the pyramids? The Slayer does that great Seasons in the Abyss. The whole film clip is at the Giza Plateau. I love it. I'll come back to the Recat structure in a second. Just this all caps question, of course, gets my attention. Yeah, I shouldn't, but drones are banned. Yeah, drones are definitely banned in Egypt. It's a quick path to getting arrested in Egypt if you bring a drone. You won't even get in with a drone. If you try to fly in, they'll confiscate it at the airport. You can't really get permits for it. Very tightly controlled. They're very militaristic over there, really worried about using, they freak out, basically. I wouldn't risk it myself. I do think that the opportunity for technology to sort of skip regulation is coming when it comes to drones. We had that period for a while, right? When drones first came out, no one really knew about them. No one was looking for them in luggage. There was a period of a couple of years where you could pretty much take a drone and fly it anywhere. There's people with footage like over, meteor impact sites, Machu Picchu, places like this where you just can't get into with drones anymore. And everywhere you go now, it's like no drones. And a lot of countries, like Peru's a good one, Egypt, a lot of these popular tourist countries for this sort of stuff, they don't like you having drones, and in fact they often will confiscate them at the border when you come in. So I do think the time's coming though when the technology comes down. Like I've got a free, one of the guys in my Discord is right into this, like at the cutting edge of drone technology, building these little drones and stuff. And I think there's a time coming when they're going to be so quiet and so small and so easy to transport and so easily controllable, almost autonomous with their idea of collision detection. And you may get one that fits in the palm of your hand, and you could imagine it, just let it like go into those shafts off the King's Chamber and taking footage, like I think there'll be a period where that may be a reality, not that far away. We'll get to the whole, Prometheus drone thing where we throw it up and it maps everything out. God, that's a stupid movie, Prometheus, isn't it? I really had high hopes for that movie, and they just ruined it with the dumbest set of people I've ever seen in a movie, and the just dumbed down plot makes me crazy. It's one of the reasons I can't watch anything in Hollywood anymore. However, let's have you looked at the megaliths in Jerusalem? Look at it, all caps. I shouldn't be doing that. There are megaliths in Jerusalem, megaliths all over the world. I haven't looked at all of them yet. There's a lot of places I want to go. I'm hoping to get to Baalbek next year. If I do this trip, we want to do an extension to Baalbek. But let's move on to what I want to talk about today, which is this thing. So, firstly, I'll say that, Graham doesn't need me to defend him. He did respond to this himself. This is not anything to do with defending Graham. I'm more interested in sort of critiquing the approach that's been used in this set of articles and contrasting it with kind of the way that anything outside of these orthodox mainstream approaches gets attacked. Mostly alternative explanations for these things get ignored. But when you have someone like Graham who's just so popular and so big that it's very difficult for them to ignore. So when they go at him, he's often the target. I mean, this isn't the first time he's been attacked. The BBC put a hit piece on him. They actually had Horizon, I think, it was a whole show. They had to retract it. He fought them. They actually had to step back on all that stuff. The Science he got vindicated with some of his beliefs in the Science magazine. It's something he talks about. So it's not something that he doesn't need me to defend him. I'm primarily interested in looking at how they're doing this, and then looking at also the other tactics that sort of tend to get used along with this, because off the top of my head, this is 27 pages they devoted in the archaeological record, which is this trade mag, which is it's basically a journal for archaeologists inside their industry, their profession. And I would describe this as really a giant collection of logical fallacies. It's nothing more than a 27-page straw man and straw man logical fallacy mixed in with some ad hominems. And it's extremely hypocritical because some of the people that are involved in this, in particular John Hoops, is the professor for anthropology at Kansas University or Kansas State. He's out there on Twitter, and we're going to get into him and look at some of the things he says on Twitter too. But he's throwing accusations of logical fallacies at everybody else, and it's like everything he doesn't like is biased. That's the other. We'll get into some of that stuff, but it's like a characteristic of human engagement in a lot of ways. I mean, you can probably make some correlations to some of the modern political stuff in terms of you'll often find people accusing other people of the very behavior that they are exhibiting. There's an old Dutch proverb, and it roughly translates to, you are what you say they are. So in this, he talks about ad hominems and strawmans. He talks about how the belief in pseudo-archaeology is essentially a religious belief. And it's incredibly hypocritical because you can turn that around, and I will show you a number of strawman attacks in here. There's a number of ad hominem attacks in here. And I have often talked about how I think that the whole orthodox approach, in a lot of ways, that's a religion. Like it's a belief system that comes in, because it is not, we'll get into it in that particular article. So This was 27 pages. It was entitled Pseudo-Archaeology, Scholarship and Popular Interests in the Past, in the Present. And I'll say right off the top that I just don't, I don't appreciate the term pseudo-archaeology, pseudoscience. It's just to me, it feels just like a direct method of just trying to discredit somebody by using a term. It's a heavily loaded term. It's one of Wikipedia's favorite terms. And before we go into that, I will just show you that I do want to show up this. So Graham has responded to this on his website. So if you haven't seen it already, you might want to look at his response. He kind of just does it a little tongue-in-cheek, which, by saying, quote, "I can only be grateful to the Society for American Archaeology, the Professional Association for the Archaeology of the Americas, for devoting no less than 27 pages of the November issue of its journal to an attack on my 2019 book, America Before." Now, and this is key, they are saying that they're criticizing or attacking specifically his book, America Before. It's over here. I've got a copy of it here. But what you'll find when you look at the articles is that they attack nothing. They don't deal with any of the stuff that he brings up in the book head on. They don't attack anything that he says directly. They attack him personally by trying to pull in all the other things around his life, and they build in giant sets of straw man arguments by basically wrapping up everybody else and every other alternative argument in it and attacking that. And it's a super common tactic, right? This is, if you've watched the debate, or I guess the podcast on the Joe Rogan Experience with Michael Shermer.
And you've been to Giza, though?
No, I've never been to Giza.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. Michael Shermer did essentially the same thing on that podcast, right? He didn't attack anything that Graham specifically says in his books or his research. He's pulling from all these other sources, all these other authors, and just rolling that up in this big bundle of, this is a big bundle of pseudo-archaeology and you're all wrong. It's called a straw man, right? This is I did have a podcast I haven't released yet. I wrote a bunch about it, but this all comes back to things called logical fallacies and the trivium of logic, rhetoric, and grammar. It's what they used to call a liberal education. It's a classical liberal education, right? Music, there's all these other things that are involved in what they would call a classical liberal education. And part of that is learning how arguments work, how language and structure works. And that's where logic, rhetoric, and grammar comes in. And your common fallacies in arguments are things like appeals to authority. There's a whole list of them. There's a good example of an appeal to authority is essentially saying, well, this is because we're in a position of authority, or because this is a mainstream perspective, then it must be true. I often find this as an argument that gets used because, I criticize religion a fair bit in my stuff. It's just not something that I personally believe in when it comes to things like modern day Christianity. It's not a criticism of anyone's personal beliefs. You believe what you want. But coming at me in the comment section and saying, well, you're essentially, I get the argument that people say, well, millions and millions of people believe this, so it must be true. That's not an argument. And it's certainly not, it's an appeal to authority. It's a logical fallacy. It's another example of an appeal to authority might have been the geocentric model of the universe back in the day when Copernicus and Galileo were running around, and everybody in the world thought that the heavens, the sun, the universe revolved around the earth. It doesn't make it true, but everybody believed it. And if you said, well, everybody believes this, it must be true, that's an appeal to authority. It's a common tactic, right? There's common tactics, but the one specifically that happens in here a lot is straw man and ad hominems, as we'll get into. So, need more volume, please. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pause the music while I get into this, so there won't be any other distraction. You can turn it up on your end. I can't get too much closer into the microphone. So let's get into this. And so it's 27 pages. Starts off down here a little bit. So we start with the introduction, and we'll talk a bit about Mr. Hoops here. So John W. Hoops is the professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Kansas. He writes the introduction here. He also contributes one of the articles that's in this series of articles. And what we're going to do is I'm going to quote. Obviously, the emphasis is mine in terms of the highlighting. This is just something that I've done. I'm going to quote a bunch of this, and we're going to talk about what they're saying, what it means, and why I think it's not a valid argument in a lot of ways, certainly not a valid criticism of what Graham's been doing. So, quote, at the time of this writing, September 30th, 2019, America Before was ranked number 1 in Native American religion and number 2 in prehistory on Amazon, while the podcast on YouTube, he's talking about Joe Rogan Experience podcast, has 5 million and change views. It makes assertions that actively contradict and criticize professional archaeology. While new theories and constructive criticism are welcome, misrepresentations of archaeological data and interpretations are not. The following articles do not specifically review America Before or similar works of pseudo-archaeology. Instead, they seek to place this material in a broader context and make it easier to answer the questions from students, journalists, or members of the general public that derive from incorrect information. So, right up front, you're getting a sense of the way this is going. We're not going to address anything that's in the book. We're not going to talk about any of the facts that are in here. And as we get into this, I'll tell you some of the things that are massively conspicuously absent from this criticism of his book because, stuff they don't want to talk about. But what they're trying to do is essentially inoculate you against thinking wrong, right? This is a conditioning for how you're supposed to think this. We're going to take everything he says and put it in this bundle over here and inoculate you against it. So you don't have to take any of it seriously. Forget about the data. Don't listen to anything he specifically says. That's straight out of the gate. That's the tactic that they're planning to do here. And this is otherwise known as a straw man attack. As we'll see, they build up a straw man set of arguments that really has very little to do with what Hancock's saying in the book, and then they're going to argue against that and just try and connect it back to Hancock, right? Pretty disingenuous. Continuing. Hancock's principal assertion is that a late Pleistocene civilization existed in the Americas whose material culture was comparable to that of 19th century Europe. This civilization, Hancock argues, had the additional benefit of psychic abilities, including telepathy, telekinesis for moving megaliths, remote viewing, and magical healing powers. He claims it was destroyed by a direct hit from a cluster of meteorites that initiated the Younger Dryas, in the process causing the simultaneous extinction of Clovis culture and the Pleistocene megafauna, extinguishing superior ancient knowledge, and causing widespread cultural amnesia from which we have yet to recover. Hancock suggests that this civilization had its roots in a far older population. Fair enough. I'm not sure if that's exactly what he says in terms of like it's all magic. I know Graham, and in fact this is a common tactic that they like to do here as well, is like Graham's written a bunch of other books. They attack his beliefs in shamanism and psychedelics, and we'll get into some of that stuff too because there's a couple of chances to discuss that, I think. And essentially, it's they're putting all of his stuff into a bundle. I don't think you need to invoke telekinesis and all this other stuff to explain it. In my mind, you just need to invoke technology. I think there are a number of examples and evidence for said advanced technology. A couple of people complaining about the sound. Your sound volume is quite low. I can hear you, sure, but are you sure you cannot raise the volume? My sound is fine. Okay. He never did. He referenced other people's work. Yeah, right. He does reference other people's work, and that's actually a common thing too. So, yeah, volume's great. So if you're having trouble hearing me, I can only suggest you turn it up at your end. I think you have controls, headphones or speakers at your end. I've got it up fairly loud. Yeah, I don't like the magic argument either. It's not something that I sort of invoke, but that's not really something he does either, I don't think. I think it's certainly, in a lot of cases, he speculates. I know he ties it into some of the shamanistic nature of things, but that's not it's not a main aspect of what he's doing. There's an awful lot in this book and in Magicians of the Gods and in Fingerprints of the Gods that is direct evidence and correlation between what ancient people said, evidence in the archaeology, evidence in the megaliths, all that sort of stuff. So, and all right, continuing here, we'll come back to this in a sec. Though professional archaeologists will likely find such arguments absurd, many readers and podcast listeners insist that Hancock's assertions are credible. His 10 books on topics ranging from the Ark of the Covenant to monuments on Mars and Upper Paleolithic shamanism have made him the most popular author in the genre of fringe archaeology since Eric von Daniken, and he has an active fan base. So you see what they're doing here? This is like, well, we're not going to address what he wrote in this book, so we're going to now invoke everything else that he possibly has written about other things. Yep, he's written about shamans, he's written a book on Mars, and we're going to call out Eric von Daniken. Trust me, he gets wide mention in these series of articles, as does Giorgio Tsoukalos and all of the other ancient alien folks. I mean, Hancock does not invoke ancient aliens in any of his work. He's not part of that crowd. But this is just the tactic when it comes to creating a straw man argument to make it easier to argue against, right? For that matter, Hancock writes fiction. I'm actually surprised that they didn't criticize him for writing fiction and somehow invoking what he wrote in fiction as lining up with what he's writing in this book. If these people want to be taken seriously, I can only recommend that they specifically engage him on the facts. And the hypocrisy of this comes from the things that these authors, particularly Professor whatever his face here is, the stuff he says on Twitter about how to engage with pseudo-archaeology. And it's we'll get to that, but it's it's unbelievably hypocritical, because all of the things he says you shouldn't do, that's what he's doing here. His popularity, quoting again, his popularity is enhanced by his promotion of the use of psychedelic substances, especially ayahuasca, a traditional beverage from Amazonia. America before cites and critiques academic research by specialists in archaeology, anthropological genetics, geoarchaeology, and archaeoastronomy. Its copious endnotes and extensive bibliography selectively introduce readers to orthodox archaeology, while asserting that its conclusions are wrong and falsely suggesting that professional archaeologists are unwilling to change our minds when persuasive new data and new ideas emerge. To the public, this looks like academic scholarship when it is not, contributing to confusion. Okay. Interesting, right? So I don't know why he does this quotes around orthodox, but that's what it is. They do accuse him quite often of cherry picking their data and using it out of context, which I don't think is the case at all, and we'll get into a few examples of that. But as you can tell, again, they're just criticizing him for his belief in or his use of ayahuasca and his other parts of his life and the benefits that he gets from those types of things. Again, it has nothing to do with what's written in this book. You're now just attacking the man. And it gets a lot worse. It gets a lot worse. In fact, it's this next stuff that makes me just go, I couldn't believe that what I was reading. And, it's what made me want to respond to it. So again, this next section here, he outlines exactly how they're going to attack this. Quote, "We intend our articles in this special thematic section of the SSA archaeological record to place this material within a deeper historical context, one informed by familiarity with the Western esoteric tradition, folklore about paranormal and supernatural phenomena, the impacts of popular culture on scientific literacy, the misuse of scientific data, and persistent beliefs in mythological explanations about the ancient past." So already we're hearing that this... have you tackled or do you want to tackle the reason for the mainstream resistance to the work? Yeah, I'm going to talk about it. So he's basically saying up front here that we're not going to engage him on the issues. We're not going to engage him on the data. We're going to try and put this in this context and call it fringe and invoke all this other stuff about esoteric traditions and the history of fringe, which is actually the article that Hoops writes in this. It's really got, again, nothing to do with what's in the book, but that's the way they're trying to put it in a bucket of crazy over here and just paint the whole thing as crazy without having to engage on the issues and on the topics. And conspicuously absent are things like the Younger Dryas, things like Bluefish Caves, and we'll get into all that stuff. But this next bit is what really just made me shake my head. I just couldn't believe what I was reading. And there's articles later on that actually get into this. But get this. So this is, again, the introduction. Quoting, "We assert that fringe beliefs should receive even greater attention as topics of valid academic inquiry." Fair enough. "Pseudo-archaeology actively promotes myths that are routinely used in the service of white supremacy, racialized nationalism, colonialism, and the dispossession and oppression of indigenous peoples. Let that sink in. Pseudo-archaeology actively promotes myths that are routinely used in the service of white supremacy, racialized nationalism, colonialism, and the dispossession and oppression of indigenous peoples. Wow. If ever there was a hot button list of dog whistle liberal elitist terms, then he's pushed all the buttons. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's actually shameful that this comes in. And there's articles that we'll get in. There's articles that take it sort of further later on. And to accuse him of being, so you're and this is massively ad hominem in my mind, right? You're attacking the man in a huge way. You're attacking his character here. You call him a pseudo-archaeologist, and you're saying that pseudo-archaeology actively promotes all of these things. This is absolute nonsense. If you know anything at all about Graham Hancock, and I know him reasonably well, I actually just had an email conversation with him over the last couple of days. He's going to be on my show hopefully in March of next year or thereabouts. We've gone back and forth. He recently tweeted out my article with or interview with George Howard, which was great of him to do. We had a little chit chat. But if you know anything about him at all, like he is the furthest thing from he's one of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet. He's caring, he's an individual, and to call him somebody that supports something like white supremacy or colonialism or the dispossession and oppression of indigenous people is absolutely ridiculous. And this is nothing more than just hype generation and just hot button dog whistling terms that are very popular in these academic circles. Like this is the type of stuff that gets thrown around in today's all the social justice agenda that comes primarily from the left, right? And if anybody's studied the history of some of this stuff, I have. The origins of that whole social justice crap that we see today, all of the historical revisionism that is just plaguing society today. You know where all that came from, right? Originally, that all got started in Ivy League schools, in very liberal universities, and the whole thing's just a joke because what you have there is some of the most privileged people on the planet, people that attend Harvard and Ivy League institutions and all things like this, also complaining at the same time about being the most dispossessed, the most oppressed, the most just discriminated against people in the world. It's unbelievably disingenuous, and he's speaking to his own crowd here, and I just find this just shameful. It absolutely has nothing to do with Graham Hancock, with his. I mean, look at his family. I mean, as a person too. It's just I find it absolutely disgusting. But anyway, there's some articles that get into it even worse, but it's just dog whistling, really. There's nothing behind this at all other than just these terms. I mean, there's nothing backing any of this stuff up. So it continues, this continues into the vein of like, well, we shouldn't be so arrogant and we shouldn't be, we shouldn't have this appearance of snobbery and sort of ivory tower elitism, which they get a giant fail on somehow, but they say that. It's like they say one thing, behave another way, right? So continuing here. While it's easy to mock and dismiss fringe theories from Bigfoot to Atlantis to ancient aliens, my words now, which also have nothing to do with anything that he's written in his books. He's never written about Bigfoot or ancient aliens. Throw Atlantis in there too, why not? Appearances of elitism or superiority harm legitimate archaeology and turn public opinion against us. You're damn right. We need to be mindful of the cultural trends that generate interest in this material and the effects that these have on all of us. It behooves us to understand what claims are being made and why, and to formulate effective strategies to address them. These are relevant not only for winning essential public support for archaeology and promoting responsible science education, but for encouraging archaeologists to become directly engaged with some of the principal debates and controversies of our times. Okay, so don't be elitist and snobby. Now, interesting that they say that, and we're going to analyze that. Remember some of this stuff as we go through these articles and we look at some of the context. I'm not going to quote all of the articles to this extent, but I wanted to focus on this introduction, because there's another, good Lord, let me find it here. Okay, so let's take a little look-see at Mr. Hoops. Who is this guy? Let me bring this up. By the way, I just want to show, like, Graham tweeting out my interview with George Howard. Thanks for doing that. By the way, George Hoops does chime in on this. He chimes in on actually a whole bunch of stuff, and this is why I'm kind of doing this, is because he's very publicly engaging in this debate on Twitter. He's sort of publicly engaging with the people that talk about this. He's attacked George Howard. He's attacked Martin Sweatman, and we'll get into some of those details. But so this is John Wilton Hoops, PhD. He's the professor, Kansas State University, lifelong academic, and I can tell you how I know that, because if you click on his curriculum, his CV, it's 21 pages long or something, which is just a good sign that this isn't a CV that really gets used in the real world, because trust me, nobody in the real world applying for jobs is going to want to see a 21-page CV. They typically want that to be on one page, but whatever. That's the way it works in that world. So lifelong academic, funded by these institutions, which I'm sure some of that funding comes from taxpayer funding, which is always good. So he's out there on Twitter, and he's very actively in engaging with a lot of people. And I would say too, it is, if you do want to engage with him online, do it respectfully. There's no reason to stoop to the same sort of level of name calling or anything. I've had a few engagements with him. It's fine. He does seem willing to want to talk and actually engage in podcasts and stuff. This is one of their pushes that they're trying to get into the popular media and whatnot. In fact, in some of these articles, they do talk about, like, we should be out there writing these bestsellers as well, because that's really easy. Right? So Graham Hancock's talent, his research, and all the time and effort he puts into it, and his ability as a writer has nothing to do with it. They certainly are capable of writing bestsellers. Good luck with that. Start your own podcast. Get it going. And there's been some discussion in that way. So I think that's actually, if we can do that, that would be beneficial. But I'm not sure how far we're going to get, because as I go down here and I look at it, so here's, for an example, I showed you the tweet before. This is in my OneNote. I've taken pictures of this rather than trying to dig through. Ben, if you highlight the whole page, it defeats the purpose of the highlight. Yeah, I know. I'm not highlighting the whole page everywhere else. It's all right. So this is, I've taken these images from Twitter rather than trying to dig through it. So again, Graham Hancock tweeting out, my good friend George Howard of Cosmic Tusk tells it as it is about the episode of Global Cataclysm. He's talking about the Younger Dryas. My video with George. Hoops responds, and this is common, he points to Wikipedia quite a lot. This Wikipedia article provides historical background as well as an up-to-date summary of the claims and the research, and he points to the Wikipedia article on the Younger Dryas. Let's take a quick look at the Wikipedia article on the Younger Dryas. It's an interesting article. You can look at it in your own time. Everybody has their opinions on Wikipedia. I find it to be just a bastion of establishment groupthink. It's absolutely biased. If you think this is the standard for fact in the world, like, Wikipedia has got massive issues. If you want to find, like, the plumb the full depths of crazy town and bias that is Wikipedia, there's a guy on YouTube, Sticks Hex and Hammer, did a video on how there's all these articles and they're talking about, bias in the media against Bernie Sanders, because clearly they're all massively supportive of Bernie Sanders on Wikipedia, because ultra left wing kind of guys. Socialism, yay! It's never so. Let's get socialism right this time. Never worked before, but we'll get it right this time. Swear to God, we'll take all your shit. We'll control who has it and whatever. Yeah. But so this article though, it talks a little bit about it. Talks about some evidence. Nothing really there, right? There's talks about the history of the hypothesis, which carries on about all of these books that were written in the 1880s by, like, Donnelly and a few other people. I mean, the idea of a comet hitting the planet and causing damage isn't a new idea, obviously. But this is not where the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis comes from, does it? I mean, we know that there's some, we'll get into some of the scientific work that's behind it, but this is the level that you get at Wikipedia, right? We start to discredit it by essentially calling out all these fringe authors, 21st century revival and refinement, There's a bunch of words here about the criticism against it. Some of that's been expressed in scientific papers that have been addressed by other scientists, which we'll get into in a minute. But this is also cracks me up here. In popular culture, so quoting from the Wikipedia page, in 95, pseudo-archaeology author Graham Hancock, citing the works of Charles Hapgood and Rand Flemeth on the cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis, suggested in his books that a major meteorite impact event of the late Pleistocene caused the Earth to shift, blah, 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 right? So you literally have him being called a pseudo-archaeology author on Wikipedia, and Hoops is over here claiming that Wikipedia isn't biased. Now, what do we know about the Younger Dryas? Well, we talked, if you watched the interview I had with George Howard, we know quite a bit about the Younger Dryas. And he points out over here, this is a tweet from George Howard that says, "This carefully and responsibly prepared bibliography confirms that there is not equal evidence against the Younger Dryas," whatever that means. "Please assemble another bibliography of peer-reviewed major journal articles in order to defend your ham-handed assertion," with a link to the bibliography on the Younger Dryas. Now, this is what John Hoops has to say about that, and this is responding to me because I called this out as well. He says, "The full bibliography on Cosmic Tusk is clearly biased towards the conclusion of the site's contributors. The bibliography of this article represents a great deal more balance," again, pointing back to Wikipedia. What I want to know is, how is a bibliography biased? Let's look at it. This is the bibliography on the Cosmic Tusk. This is George Howard's website. And I know the guy that assembled this, Mark, one of the researchers that works with George Howard. This took a lot of time to do, and he's basically gone and included every scientific paper that talks about the Younger Dryas. This is all peer-reviewed scientific work, right? There are papers supporting it in green, papers critical of it in yellow, and papers refuting it in pink. Now, down here, there's just a giant list of papers, right? There's literally like 180 papers now. All of these things supporting the Younger Dryas. These are all peer-reviewed scientific papers that get into detail about the scientific evidence supporting this. All of the impact proxies from more than 50 sites in the Northern Hemisphere. Now we have sites in the Southern Hemisphere supporting it. We have mainstream researchers and scientists in South Africa now with the Wonder Crater, all supporting basically the scientific evidence for the Younger Dryas. This has nothing to do with books that were written 150 years ago, right? There is absolutely nothing to do with that. But there's just a wealth of peer-reviewed science behind the Younger Dryas at this point. Now, that it doesn't end there, right? So Hoops is a consistent criticizer of the Younger Dryas, and we'll talk about why that is. Right, he's replying back, "You don't seem to have considered this article or its many sources. There is plenty of well-warranted peer-reviewed skepticism about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis." Again, pointing to Wikipedia. You know what else has a lot of peer-reviewed and many authors and has a lot of work put into it? All of these scientific papers do. His criticism of this and the way that he tries to attach this whole hypothesis to books by Donnelly and whatnot about comet impacts and pseudo-archaeology is a real discredit to the hundreds of scientists that are working on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. This is, I don't know how much it takes to become mainstream, but bear in mind that none of these guys are anthropologists or archaeologists, by the way. They're real scientists, play with big boy toys like, scanning electron microscopes. Ooh, all the stuff that's actually dealing with science. Archaeology and anthropology, great, you're experts on basket weaving and pottery in Costa Rica or something. That's got nothing to do with impact proxials and microspherals of impact and platinum anomalies in the dirt and all this sort of stuff. Absolutely unbelievable. And he discredits all of these people with his dismissal of this. Now, Martin Sweatman chimes in here, many of you know who Martin Sweatman is. He wrote, I've got his book over here, Prehistory Decoded. And he's been producing recently an excellent series of YouTube videos that's been reviewing the scientific literature of the Younger Dryas, all the stuff that supports it. And he's laughing at Hoops here, saying, "Wikipedia? Haha, that's your standard? Oh boy, I recommend my reviews on YouTube. I go through the papers one by one, up to 2011 so far. His latest ones takes him up to 2012. How does Hoops respond to that? Wikipedia articles are written by multiple editors, with contributions reviewed by editors and assiduously sourced. They can also be regularly updated. Your YouTube videos are clearly biased. I'll take Wikipedia. I mean, what else has been written by multiple editors and reviewed by editors and assiduously sourced? All of these scientific papers. Unbelievable. Just unbelievable. At the same time, you've got, this is the type of stuff he puts on his Twitter line. He loves to throw logical fallacies at people. It's like he replying to Martin Swedman. It's best to avoid this. Your fallacy is an ad hominem. And he throws these at everyone like, your fallacy is straw man. I mean, meanwhile, everything he's doing, giant logical fallacies. Unbelievable. Here's a good example of an ad hominem attack. This is just a random response to one of Graham Hancock's tweets about how he spent 2 years on big pharma antidepressants, took a lot of time to get off them. He's expressing some support for something like psilocybin and mushrooms, which, by the way, massive amount of research now supporting the idea of these things as effective antidepressants. Psilocybin in all sorts of clinical trials has all sorts of benefits. But no, John Hoops, life tip, don't take medical advice from anti-science hucksters. It's not an ad hominem at all. Professional advice, this guy actually doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't believe him. Seems like a nice guy, right? So here's some other things when we get into the younger Dryas, right? So just random tweets from him I found on his timeline. John Hoops, why don't younger Dryas impact hypothesis proponents cite or discuss or give credit to Donnelly? I suspect it's because they want their theory to seem fresh and new, not like something that's been rehashed after having been published almost 140 years ago. It's got nothing to do with any of the scientific literature. Yeah, people have thought comets have hit the Earth. That seems like a big problem for the Earth. I mean, that pretty much describes most of the massive extinction level events that have happened to the planet. I know there are other sources for it, volcanism, this and that, but the idea that he's trying to tie the whole hypothesis, right? He's trying to tie the whole hypothesis to this to these old books that just talk about, like, you know, old religious traditions and whatnot. Meanwhile, there are hundreds of scientific papers and he's just discrediting all of them. Here's another one. Last one. There has long been a close relationship between younger Dryas impact hypothesis advocates and evangelical Christian biblical archaeologists who are seeking to prove the veracity of literal interpretations of the book of Genesis. The religious motivations cannot be ignored. So now he's just like, you people believe in the younger Dryas, you must be religious crazies. Unbelievable. No, it's not possible that the actual Genesis and all the other things were eyewitness accounts of such an event, and they've been mythologized and put into stories, and that's how they survive down through time, through the nature of human discourse and how we retain information through storytelling and oral traditions. No, you're just a religious crazy. It's got nothing to do with the truth. So I find it just absolutely hypocritical and unbelievable. So this is what one thing I wanted to call out, which was something he posted, which was his rule of thumbs for engaging pseudo-archaeology. Let me put some music back on, just because my voice is dying. Establish authority. Embrace skepticism. Review new ideas. Maintain academic honesty. Focus on data. Avoid fallacies, especially ad hominem. Explain scientific methods. I mean, deal gently with religion. Like, none of these things have anything to do with what's in these articles. I find it pretty outstanding that you on one hand you say one thing and you completely do the other. It's just, you are what you say they are. It's unreal. One other little thing I wanted to get into before we carry on with the article is let me find it. Where was it? It was in my browser. So we've had some experience with engaging with the public, right? This is something that he had talked about. What he wants to do is have archaeologists engage with the debate, right? Engage with some of the principal debates and controversies of our time. We've had some examples of that. We've tried this once or twice before, as I recall. Maybe some of you have seen it as well. Here's an example of establishment figures engaging in a debate. I was at this particular debate.
This man is a thief and a good wolf took him. And
Unbelievable, right? This is this is mainstream archaeology, right? Engaging in the debate. This whole trip was sold on the premise of a debate between these two. Zahi was looking for an excuse to throw the toys out the pram. Didn't want to have anything to do with Hancock's presentation. Didn't attend it. You know, doesn't want to address any of the specific things that he raises. Same damn thing happened over and over again. Like this is what happens when we have academics, or I guess these guys want to do mainstream engagement with the article, right? I could get into this next one, which is Zahi Hawas's kind of ignorance of Göbekli Tepe and where that is. In fact, I'm in the audience over here. I'm just in here. I'm in a bunch of these shots with this question. It's pretty hilarious. I'll just let this play for a second.
Thank you for your presentation. As one of the world's leading experts on Egypt, do you have a position, or are you going to present a position on what impact, if any, the excavations of Göbekli Tepe has had on your understanding of Göbekli Tepe? What impact those excavations have on your understanding of Egypt's history?
Who did the excavation again?
Göbekli Tepe? Yes, the
Something was happening in Turkey? Your question about something in Egypt or in Turkey?
What is this Göbekli Tepe?
The excavations that are going on in Turkey vis-a-vis Egypt's history.
What has been found in Turkey are Egyptian stuff.
No.
See how he's standing over her too? He's like leaning forward.
Egypt's history is, what is the impact of these incredible excavations in Turkey have to do? Well, maybe Graham could explain a bit, and then
I have. Did you ever hear about this? Make a comment.
The Turkey.
Make I love that he just turns to his little pet archaeologist. Make a comment. Say something. Fair enough. Easy to attack Zahi on this stuff. It had no idea about Göbekli Tepe. Doesn't want to engage in the argument, right? It's off in Turkey. It's got nothing to do with Egypt. You know, in the same thing, you get this in this same sequence is where you get this drop from.
Because I don't believe in radar.
Because I don't believe in radar. He doesn't believe in radar or whatever. It's just, you know, like.
Shame on you!
Yeah, that's it's no good. So there's an example of trying to engage in the argument, and the same thing happened with Shermer, right? It was Shermer did the same thing that happens in this journal, which is just trying to bundle up all of the other fringe arguments and make it one big thing, a straw man that you can then go and attack rather than engage Hancock directly on any of the issues. So I'll move past the giant set of highlighting here. The same thing kind of happens in these other articles, and I want to get into a couple of different examples as we go into it. So one of these other articles, it's called Why Not a Pacific Migration, which is misunderstandings in genetics in service to pseudoscience, right? So if you don't know the background behind this, I'll just spend a minute to explain it, which is easily explainable by pretty much one picture. It's a new study. I think it came out in 2015 about looking at the genetic indicators between different populations, and it's best sort of described by this image right here. I'll try and make it a little bigger. There we go. Right, so what this study found, long story short, these red dots, right? It found a genetic marker that indicates the same populations with the same ancestry from early Australians, Papua New Guineans, and then also people in South America. And the notable exception here is that you don't have people in Central or North America with this same genetic indicator. And remember that the story of human history as we know it, certainly according to anthropologists, archaeologists, is the diaspora of humanity came out of Egypt came out of Africa. We went north through that land bridge, and there was eventually, once the glaciers opened up, right around that 12,000 BC age, you had a land bridge between the glaciers, and that's how humanity then populated down into the Americas, which would make sense. if if we saw this genetic indicators saying that the same population of people went along that path, but we don't have that. We have this indicators that happen over here in Australia and Papua New Guinea and sort of Asia, and then we have them in South America. So what this indicates is that you had the same group of people that likely got there somehow. It seems like the most likely explanation was crossing over the Pacific Ocean. Now, this also happens to be what the authors of this study themselves believed, although they don't say it in the paper. They don't say it in the paper because they were afraid of being attacked by archaeologists and anthropologists, because it's just too much of upsetting the apple cart, right? They're just sticking to the genetics. Now, when we go back to this article, let's quote a little bit from this. So, by the way, Jennifer A. Raff is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Kansas. So, bosses up at the upper article. So, I assume she's in the same boat. Quoting, as other articles in this issue point out, there is a long history of attempts to use archaeological data in order to justify fringe narratives of the past. One person who's done this recently is Graham Hancock in his book America Before. Hancock details recent genetic findings in the Americas that he claims support his model of a trans-Pacific migration of people to South America. His marshalling of genetics evidence in support of this model is confident, complementary to geneticists, and unfortunately quite wrong. Nice statement. There's nothing backing up this wrong statement that she says. There's literally nothing in here that says this is wrong. In fact, she just goes on to say that this finding presents an intriguing and unresolved challenge to our models of the peopling of the Americas. True. There is nothing in this that actually points to it being wrong. What she presents in this article is a kind of another interpretation of the data. It's maybe an alternative interpretation. What does this mean? From where and when did this ancestry come, and when? Why is it seen in some populations but not in others? Neither question is yet answerable with current data. I would agree. There's probably more research that needs to happen here, but it's certainly indicative of some interesting things. Now, this is the alternative that she proposes right here. At present, the provisional explanation most commonly accepted by geneticists to account for these results is that the initial Beringian ancestral population was highly structured, with different subpopulation, perhaps in different refugia across Beringia, harboring a diversity of ancestries. So, in short, what does this mean? It means that this was a big group of people, that within this group of people, you had some people didn't breed with other people, right? That's what she's saying. That's it. She's saying that, well, there must have been a caste system, or these, so it's only this small group of people inside the bigger group of people that breeded together, right? So we can't, that's how we get trace indicators of this genetic markers down through the population as if they come through that northern land bridge. It's a very convenient explanation. And by the way, she says that this is most commonly accepted by geneticists. It's not the theory that's commonly accepted by the geneticists who actually authored this study. Hancock talked to them. If you go and watch some of the lectures that he's made about America Before, he'll say to you that when he spoke to them, they were like, yeah, it's indicative of this trans-Pacific migration, but we can't state that in this scientific paper. It's a scientific paper. It's not there to provide theories and guesswork. Now, while it's an alternative explanation for the data, right? It's a possibility. Doesn't mean that Hancock's interpretation is wrong. In fact, Hancock's interpretation was most likely supported by these geneticists. It's just you're saying that he's wrong without actually providing evidence that he's wrong. The most evidence that you can marshal here is a very convenient alternative idea for it. And she goes on to say, this affinity between Amazonian populations and Australasians has been taken by many non-geneticists, including Graham Hancock, as evidence of an ancient trans-Pacific migration by people from Australia and Melanesia to South America. So it's been taken by a bunch of non-geneticists. Let's just look at this again. What did she say her name was? Jennifer Raff is an assistant professor in the Department of That's a really weird way to spell genetics. No, it spells anthropology. Also not a geneticist. So you're just discrediting these geneticists by writing this. It goes on to cite a couple of other oddities. There's a data point in China with somebody that has this actual genetic indicator. Okay, doesn't mean anything, right? It means people probably also went to China with the same markers. So again, this really has very little to do. It's an interesting alternative hypothesis, but doesn't really have anything to do with what was written in this study. And again, she just accuses him at the end here of using bias, right? Hancock's interpretation of the genetic literature is strongly biased to fit the narrative he is promoting in his book. Just having a go at him. I hope the boss was impressed. So we get on to the next article, which is a attack of the Cerruti Mastodon site. Now this is kind of interesting. We don't need to quote all of this. I'm not going to. What I'll say about the Cerruti Mastodon site is that this is quite the interesting little publication that came up in Nature. If you go and look this up, it's a publication that suggested that there is evidence for hominid, whether it was Homo sapien or not, is definitely questionable. Could have been Neanderthal, Denisovan, anything like that. There's evidence of, tool using and stones used to break open mastodon or mammoth bones at a site in San Diego that has been dated back to 130,000 years ago, which is well and truly before the 12, 13,000 year boundary of the Clovis culture, right? Because the whole Clovis first doctrine states that there were no humans, no Homo sapiens in the Americas before this date. Cerruti Mastodon site takes that site back to potentially 130,000 years ago. It's definitely a controversial site. It's a controversial find. There's no question about that. There was some criticism levied against it, saying that, well, maybe these bone breaks that we're seeing were caused by bulldozers and construction work, because it was actually found and they were constructing a highway when they found this site. That was subsequently disproven entirely by the authors by showing that over here, quote, the bone breaks were, quote, coated in thick crusts of pedogenic carbonate that dates them to long before the modern construction. And this was sort of disproved, but it's a controversial site, no question. Hancock has a few things to say about it. One of the things that he says, I'm going to play this over here because it's something that he said on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I don't want to put the video on my screen because as much as I enjoy those podcasts, he is well known for taking all sorts of copyright action against anyone that uses anything from any of his videos, and I never want that to happen. But you can hear a little clip from here about what Hancock thinks and where the amount of importance that he actually places on the Cerruti Mastodon site. And after that, we'll talk about some of the things that are missing from all of these articles, because they're cherry picking a couple of things. And these last two articles, trust me, they're the only ones that even pretend to address the stuff that's written in America before. Everything after this is just really has very little to do with what he wrote. So,
1,000-year date from the Nature paper.
By the way, this is Michael Shermer speaking. This is sourced from the Shermer, Hancock, Rogan, Randall Carlson podcast.
Yeah, I have a slide on that too.
And if okay, but
I think the
show
major
show the
speculation.
stone tools. They're nothing like Clovis points. It's just a big hand rock that might have been used. It might have been random.
Sorry, a big hand rock is all there is before 13,000 years ago?
No, I'm talking about the 130,000-year-old site.
130,000-year-old
you're talking about
site.
the San Diego thing.
We don't need to talk about that.
Why?
That raises interesting questions. Was it Neanderthals? Was it Denisovans? Was it anatomically modern humans 130,000 years ago? It raises interesting questions.
Or is it a misinterpreted site because they
Yeah,
aren't stone tools?
I'm
they're
not
just
pinning.
rocks.
I'm not pinning anything to that. I'm saying yes. That report.
The question
that
is not
report was
necessarily
published in Nature.
just about the stone tools. It's about how the bones were shattered, and they believe the bones were shattered deliberately, indicating that someone was trying to get at the marrow.
Maybe.
Indicating,
maybe. Or a tractor rolled over it, a couple of years ago. No
one had excavated. That's just speculation on your part.
Good comments.
This was one of the
immediately the find has been quibbled by the archaeological mainstream. Of course, it's been published by the archaeological mainstream too, and the rest of the mainstream is quibbling it. And we will see how that plays
out. I thought
out.
you said that can't happen.
We will say what can't happen.
That the mainstream won't allow, radical ideas to
Nature
challenge
published it, and the idea is being quibbled. And
here the Smithsonian
Nature
publishes,
certainly
so
would
apparently
not.
It's okay.
Nature certainly would not have published it if the evidence were not strong. I accept that. Nature's not in the business of publishing, fringy stuff. It is a radical proposal, but it's strong enough to justify publication in Nature. What's interesting to me is that the immediate reaction of the archaeological community is not say, well, What could this mean? Let's look into the implications of this. I mean, if there were Neanderthals or Denisovans in North America 130,000 years ago, we have a whole new scenario building here that really should interest everyone. Instead of the first reaction is, let's destroy this because it's really annoying, let's get rid of it, let's prove it's wrong, let's suggest that it was a fucking bulldozer or something like that. Maybe it was. I don't know. The work hasn't been done yet. But that instant sort of, it's almost like an immune response to an idea that doesn't fit into the prevailing paradigm. But the other work, the work in South America, the Bluefish Caves work, that's really not controversial anymore. That's very widely accepted. Clovis First is a discredited and abandoned position. And I have something else to ask you.
Okay, so there you go. He's not actually attaching any real. It's what podcast number was? I don't know what podcast number it was. If you want to find it, just search for Graham Hancock, Michael Shermer, JRE. It'll pop up. Yeah, and I did notice that nobody really argued with Randall. Randall stayed pretty quiet in that. I'm not sure it's his style to get engaged in the debates like that. But yeah, no, not many people want to argue with Randall. And you know, this is a symptom of what's missing from this whole set of articles here, right? There's a number of things really missing when it comes to this. They cherry-picked the genetic thing, which is very questionable, that article. They're talking about, there's a bunch of work talking about, there's the Cerruti Mastodon side is controversial. What's not controversial and what Graham is talking about and what is in his book is things like the Bluefish Caves, things like the Younger Dryas. They don't want to talk about those things, right? And it's funny to me when you look at the reasons why they don't want to support things like the Younger Dryas, because again, this is actual mainstream scientific work and literature, but why do guys like John Hoops not want to support that, not want to have anything to do with it? It's because of what it means for their fields, right? It's this implication that if you can accept this stuff as reality, then it has all of these follow-on cultural implications that impact the entire story, and you don't want anything to do with that, so therefore this stuff over here can't be real, can't be true, and we're going to do everything we can to attack it. That's pretty much the case, and that's the tactic that they're taking. It's very disingenuous. It's a dishonest way of dealing with the science and the data. And if these guys were actually scientists, if they were open-minded, if they were open to new data like they say they are, then they'd be willing to have discussions on the data. Like if you want to criticize the Younger Dryas, don't bring up Donnelly and the books that he wrote in the 1800s. Talk about the scientific papers. Talk about all of the impact proxies, the hundreds of scientists, real scientists, that work with real scientific methods, not just trying to interpret stuff that's in the ground as loose set of evidence. We'll get into that in a minute about how archaeology and anthropology compare to actually some of these other sciences. But they don't want to do it because it's just not an argument they want to engage in. It's why we end up with stuff like this. Okay. Let's move on. There was something here that I wanted to... I've highlighted stuff in here that is just a continual series of ad hominems and just attacking Hancock's character. They bring in all sorts of, it's the usual sort of... here we go. Today, this is quoting from the article again. Today, professional archaeologists are rarely behind the cable television shows that get picked up by the History or Travel channels. We write few trade books. However, there is also no reason why we, as professional archaeologists and professional writers, cannot seek to produce New York Times bestsellers. Go for it. If we can give academic presentations to each other once or twice a year, surely we can give interesting, engaging talks to the public in our local libraries, historic societies, and public schools. If we can write articles for peer review, can we not also write trade books, blogs, podcasts? The more we engage the public, including consumers of narratives about archaeology, prehistory, and ancient civilizations, and the more we show that professional archaeology is interesting and exciting, the more likely we are to change the minds of publishers and booksellers who publish and who push fake, fraudulent, and fantastic archaeology. Which is just, sure, go for it. I'd love to see you engage in it, but at the same time, you're calling everybody that isn't inside of your little club, pseudo-archaeologists. You're just insulting everybody's intelligence. It's a...
I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist.
Yeah. So we'll get on to one of my favorite articles in this whole thing. One of the most sort of disgraceful little attempts at trying to discredit Graham Hancock. And that is this one called Whitewashing American Prehistory. Now, you might be able to imagine what this is about just from the title and from the introduction. So let me read a little bit from this article from Jason Colavito, who I had an engagement, who actually had a little back and forth with on Twitter. We'll go back to that in a minute. Quoting, Hancock suggests that mounds, particularly those laid out in geometric or zoomorphic patterns, encode astronomical data that connect them to a lost Atlantis-like civilization once located in northern Canada, whose evangelizing representatives taught Native Americans the mathematical and astronomical skills needed to lay out and design the earthworks. Although Hancock is careful to attribute his proposed lost civilization to a Native American origin, the thematic origins of his claim are transparently derived from 19th century mound builder myths. As I show in my forthcoming book, The Mound Builder Myth, Fake History in America's Hunt for a Lost White Race, Colavito 2020, like I was referencing himself in the future, they served both political and social purposes associated with white supremacy, shaped public perceptions of Native American cultural achievements for more than a century, and still hold sway among some groups, in particular white nationalists. By building on a scaffolding of discredited 19th century views like those I examine in my book, Hancock serves to perpetuate Victorian assumptions about the limits of native potential, despite his own stated respect for Indigenous peoples the world over. It's just disgraceful. And by the way, I want to call out something else that if you read through this, these guys really just reference each other and themselves, right? So all of these guys have written articles and books, and they're writing these articles and then calling themselves, they're pointing basically at themselves and referencing each other. I'm sorry about the audio. I know there's some people saying the audio is very low. All I can suggest is that you turn it up. Other people on your end, I've got it bouncing out on here. I could show you. I mean, when I talk, right, here's the levels. It's going all the way up to the yellow. If I get right up in it, it goes this way. I've got it full flat out. So turn it up on your end if you can't hear it. I'm sorry if it's low. So this is, again, just, it's kind of shameful that they want to take it this way. And again, it just seems to be a populist topic. This article carries on and again gets into the rest of this has nothing to do with what Hancock writes. It's a criticism of Donnelly's views and books from back in the day. Donnelly's views. Donnelly was more sympathetic to Native peoples. Donnelly's attribution of the mounds in the United States. I mean, Hancock's he says that Hancock's views are transparently derived from these Victorian associations. I'm not sure that's the case. I'm pretty sure Graham is doing his own work. If you read the book, there are some remarkable discoveries that he's made in terms of associating the ancient shamanistic and Native American positions of astronomers and wearing the coats with the stars and the leopard print. Direct correlation to the ancient Egyptian positions of the same damn thing. The astronomical alignments of the mound building cultures are absolutely wonderful. It's actually quite incredible and fairly beyond the capabilities of what we know about the Native Americans and the native cultures. It is quite likely that there were other peoples that had other capabilities as part of that. It doesn't take anything away from these other cultures, and this is the kind of worst kind of historical revisionism where we love to take, it's like a real trend in academia now, and particularly in society, we like to take our current modern values and then smear them across the past and call people out for violating some modern sort of cultural standard, right? Some modern social standard about racism or whatever else. Just want to call this out. Joseph Martinez, thank you for the super chats. Has history, philosophy, theology, culture, politics. Yes, so in greater thans. If we can figure out history, everything downstream will have to change too. $10. Thanks, Joseph. Another $10 from Joseph Martinez. Thank you, mate. I would like to have a conversation about how these ancient humans' existence now affects philosophy, theology, specifically the religious symbolism and great year correlation. Great topic. We can get into that at some point. I have some of that in my myths, gods, and the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, but yeah, there is a lot to uncover in that particular area. You're right. But let me get back to this. it's such a self-destructive tactic to go and take modern values and apply them to the past. You can't judge your grandparents by the beliefs that you have. Were you alive in your grandparents' time and you were raised the same way they were, if you were part of the same groups that they were, you would have the same beliefs. You would have the same standards. It's a never-ending game when you go down that path. This is what leads people to tearing down statues. It leads to historical revisionism. It's some of the worst kind of trends in academia today, and this article kind of reflects a lot of that. You can't be doing that. You just it doesn't get you anywhere to try and apply modern values and social constructs to the past. You simply wouldn't be like that were you alive back then. It's a sad trend that happens all over the place, and it's continually happening here, and I've highlighted a few other examples of it. And one other thing that I'll say is that, again, Hancock is so ridiculous to associate him with white supremacy. Unbelievable. Anything about him and his family, I mean, just utter nonsense. And the other thing is that it's because Jason Colvito here correlates all of this to the need to explain all of this by having some sort of white civilization be responsible for all the high technology stuff way back in the past, as if that's some sort of modern or racially motivated thing. That's just simply not the case. When you go back and you look at what the ancient people said, go back and look at what they said about Viracocha, the great civilizers, as they were described by the Maya, the Inca, the Aztecs. These people, they described them as being white. Hancock calls it an advanced civilization. I don't think he makes any claims to them being white people. Who cares what color they are? But the ancient people themselves described Viracocha and his civilizers as being tall, as bearded. The local people there couldn't grow beards, ginger-haired beards. They were white people. That's just how they described them. I mean, the Quetzalcoatl, all that sort of stuff. That's what they said. That's not some racially motivated thing. It's reporting what the ancient people said themselves. But no, we can't do that because it doesn't fit the modern narrative about dispossessed, native populations everywhere we go. The world is the world. Colonialism was a thing. We went through it. Colonialism has built the Western world as we know it, good, bad, or ugly. I mean, all of those things are involved in it. You can't hold people accountable for what their ancestors did. I haven't oppressed anyone. I haven't dispossessed anyone. I'm from Australia. I'm a white person, but it's not. I'm as much an Australian as anybody that has been born there and is of Aboriginal descent. Like, I don't have any other home. That's my home. Like, I'm as Australian as them. I didn't take anybody's land, but that's the thinking now, right? I've got to be held accountable for the acts of my ancestors. Which, by the way, my father was a refugee from World War II. Came over at the end when he was 11 years old. So I don't have anything to do with the colonial aspect of it either. My heritage is Dutch, but how I got to Australia is through my dad. Did I study history and philosophy at uni? I did a little bit of history study, not really philosophy. I've kind of done a bit of that in my own time since. IT is what I got into. Figured that was probably easier to get money. So again, I don't want to beat this over the head too far. One thing I do want to note, I do want to just reference here is that I had a little interaction with Jason Colavito. Again, I'm not trying to attack him personally or anything. George Howard and I had a little chitty chat back and forth. George said to him, Jason Colavito, I enjoy your writing. However, did you believe the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis may be valid? And if so, did Graham Hancock believe so before you? The rest is speculation. Your answer is a fact. Jason says, the Younger Dryas impact may or may not have happened. That is a scientific question whose answer rests with evidence. I agree. Its reality implies nothing about the existence of Atlantis/lost civilization for which there is no evidence, and a comet could not destroy all evidence. George says, tisk, you did not answer my question. Jason says, Hancock believed early on, and then I do not see enough evidence to convince me that the impact occurred or occurred in the manner proposed. And then C, it doesn't matter to me either way since it has no logical implication for the existence of Atlantis. I think Randall Carlson might disagree with you, Jason. And I think you might want to have a conversation with him or maybe look at some of his work, because I wrote back just, wow. There is a massive weight of peer-reviewed evidence supporting the Younger Dryas. See that bibliography we talked about. Plato's date for the destruction of Atlantis aligns exactly with the modern scientific date for the Younger Dryas. Not enough evidence and no logical implication. Makes perfect sense. Now, I'm not saying that Atlantis existed right there and it did this or it did that. My point is that claiming that there is no implication of the Younger Dryas towards Atlantis is nonsense. The fact that Plato's date lines up exactly with the scientifically derived date for the impact is a huge implication, right? That's a big implication. Whether you think it's true or not, it's worth investigating. And there is a just tremendous weight of evidence behind the Younger Dryas now. We could spend days talking about it and getting into it. That bibliography's in it, but again, these guys don't want to look at the bibliography. They don't want to talk about the scientific evidence for it. All of this stuff's missing from it. So we talked about, one other thing I want to go back to is that we talked also about the Cerruti Mastodon site, right? Graham Hancock in that little clip that I talked about mentioned the Bluefish Caves. Now, you can Cerruti Mastodon sites, plenty controversial. What's not controversial is some of the other pre-Clovis sites. Now, and the Bluefish Caves is one of the best examples of it. And something else happened with the Bluefish Caves. The story of Jacques Cinq-Mars, who was the archaeologist behind the digs on this site, right? This is actually articles from the Smithsonian entitled, "What Happens When an Archaeologist Challenges Mainstream Scientific Thinking?" The story of Jacques Cinq-Mars and the Bluefish Caves shows how a toxic atmosphere can poison scientific progress. Again, direct evidence against the idea that you guys are all open to new data and new scientific evidence. You can go through this article and you can read how he was laughed at. And this is now mainstream evidence, right? So 24,000 years before present. So radiocarbon date the oldest finds to around 24,000 years before present, well and truly before the Clovis hypothesis, well and truly before there were ever supposed to be humans, Homo sapiens in the area. You have sophisticated stone tools, all that sort of stuff. And if you read what Jacques Cinq-Mars was saying in here, a couple of things that he says when he was trying to present this stuff to archaeologists was that, I'll find it here. Yeah, so he basically got laughed at when he was at these conferences. So once or twice, the mask of professional respect slipped completely. I heard laughter and snickering in the room. Tom Dillahaney remembers such conferences well. Some Clovis first people had a suffocating air of defiance and superiority at times. And Jacques Cinq-Mars himself actually says that, quote, "At one presentation he gave, they laughed at me," he says angrily today. "They found me cute." Embittered by the response, he stopped attending conferences and gave up defending the site publicly. What was the point? To Cinq-Mars, the Clovis First supporters seemed almost brainwashed. Shocking. Now, he's not the only one that has been the victim of this type of sort of academic whitewashing when you're presenting something that doesn't agree with the mainstream story. I mean, J. Harlan Bretz and the whole channeled scablands investigation in geology, right? J. Harlan Bretz was the first guy to propose that catastrophism had something to do with the formation of the channeled scablands in the eastern Washington state. He was laughed out of his career. I mean, he was on his deathbed. He was sad that when he was vindicated by, modern science, he was on his deathbed and he lamented the fact that none of his critics were alive to suffer the indignity of being proven so wrong. But he was basically laughed out of a career. This is what happens in these circles. I mean, harsh criticism's a fact. I mean, that you need that for some scientific progress, but these guys literally take away people's careers. And there was a question earlier about why do they behave this way, and why do the professions, if you like, respond so hostilely to these concepts? I think that's why. It's because their professions are threatened by these new ideas, and it's kind of a topic that we'll get into in one of these the last article that's in this series. I'll hold that thought. I'll come back to it. I just want to finish this on the Bluefish Caves. Now, this is the other thing I'll just mention is that, again, they talked about the Cerruti Mastodon site, right? There happens to be at least seven other sites in the Americas that all deal with pre-Clovis evidence, right? There's a bunch of different sites now all across the Americas, north and south, that show strong evidence for Homo sapien and hominid occupation before the Clovis whole Clovis first concept, which means people were there. They got there somehow while we still had the glaciation up north. So the whole diaspora, it fits in with the DNA and the genetic profiling. I mean, none of this gets addressed, right? Same as the Younger Dryas doesn't get addressed in the articles. None of this stuff gets addressed. They're just cherry picking and attacking people based on their character. It's kind of shameful. So let me come back to what I was going to say about why they react this way. So we've got that article, the whitewashing article. John Hoops, again, Professor Hoops, back to him. He wrote an article called The Mysterious Origins of Fringe. And just, I want to quote one little bit from this because the rest of this has literally nothing to do with... yeah.
I'm a scientist. I don't waste my time.
Right, this article from Hoops, The Mysterious Origins of Fringe, great article, sure. Has nothing to do whatsoever with what's in Hancock's book. But as he says here, a great deal of pseudo-archaeology is speculative metaphysics in the realm of religion. It is only tangentially concerned with material culture, promoting spiritual beliefs within a New Age worldview, referencing himself, of course. Its spooky aspects come from its place within the Western esoteric tradition. Now, there's a bunch of other stuff here about how this is all inspired Hancock's work. All of this stuff is what he's been doing. He just, you know, he invokes all sorts of nonsense in here and tries to apply it to Hancock's work, including, of course, Ancient Aliens, which has nothing to do with Hancock's work, just giant straw man attack. Dabbler's Den. Dude, good to see you. Thanks for watching. $10. Subscribe to the Dabbler's Den. You do great videos. Chris over there at the Dabbler's Den says that I'm killing it. Just sent me $10. Thanks, mate. He just passed 1,000 subscribers. Chris has some excellent videos on looking at the Younger Dryas, at the detailed effects, all the LiDAR imagery. I'm using LiDAR in the right context, finally. You know, he really good set of videos. His channel should have a lot more subs than what it does. Chris is also involved in getting his high school students involved in doing primary science, to doing research into the Younger Dryas. They're looking at sedimentary analysis at the Carolina Bays. Just, I can't sort of recommend that sort of thing more highly. I think it's the absolutely great use of time. Great way to get young people involved in doing real science. So well done, Chris. Dabbler's Den. Give that channel a look. So, you know, Hoops invokes all this stuff in his article. Nothing to do with Hancock's book. And there is one other that I wanted to comment on. There's America before as a paranormal charter. This actually isn't too bad, but it's just, again, same sort of thing. Nothing really to do with what Hancock wrote. Just trying to put it in the context of, well, it's just part of this paranormal world. Let's see here. This is sort of stuff that he'll invoke in this, which again has nothing to do with the book, but you know, mounds, standing stones, and ruins built by giants, wizards, or jinn. Stone tools shot by elves or Aluksob. Ancient aliens play this role in modern myths. The very business of archaeology is to extend human time into antiquity. It is no wonder that the popular image of archaeology is of curses and magical relics. Really? We're casting spells in our books now? That's what pseudo-archaeology is all about, I guess. And actually, Martin Sweatman does accurately criticize this article for stating that Hancock's work's based on, and modern sort of alternative archaeology is based on hyperdiffusion, which is this concept of civilization originating in one place and spreading across the world. I don't think he's right here. I think Sweatman's criticism of this is legitimate because, again, in this article, he also invokes white supremacist connotations, this sort of thing, talking about ancient aliens. Again, what's this got to do with what Hancock wrote in his book? Nothing. Just build giant straw man to go and argue and shoot down. You can do that. It's just got, I mean, this article itself is okay. What's it got to do with Graham Hancock? I really don't know. Yeah, you guys can, if you do go over and talk to Hoops, try and do it respectfully. You know, they're doing what they do. I don't think anything's served by attacking each other. I'd love to actually see them. I'd love to, you know, I would love to see like a redo of the Shermer podcast. Maybe not with Shermer, with somebody else. Talk to Randall Carlson about the Younger Dryas. Talk to Graham Hancock about what he says in the book. Engage him on the facts. This sort of talking past each other in these articles isn't, this is why I think Graham engages in discourse at this level, because there's no point. I'm doing it because, I found what they wrote in this to be just kind of an affront to academia, honestly. I'm not sure this even represents a bunch of what you would call mainstream archaeology. I think there's probably plenty of archaeologists that don't agree with this, but we'll get to that. That's what I want to talk about. Why they are so savagely against a lot of this stuff. Anyway, there's a bunch of this carries on. So this is the last article that I want to talk about in this, and then we'll move off the topic. I know I've probably beaten it over the head to death now. I don't believe I know the faith of modern pseudo-archaeology. Quote, in a recent New York Times article covered by a multi-day convention of fans for the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, a reporter asked the TV show most famous host, Giorgio Tsoukalos, if he really believed all this stuff. Tsoukalos said, I don't believe, I know. When Eric von Daniken popularized claims of contact with ancient astronauts, he hedged his bets with a rhetorical style rooted in the idea that he was simply exploring possibilities and asking questions. So again, we're invoking Ancient Aliens, we're invoking von Daniken, we're invoking Tsoukalos, nothing to do with what Graham's writing. But fair enough. I don't particularly agree with von Daniken or Tsoukalos either. I'm not a believer in the whole ancient alien thing. Sure, aliens most likely are out there. We're not the only source of life in the universe. I don't think they're responsible for the megalithic stuff. You can believe otherwise. I don't need them to explain it. Neither does Graham Hancock, if I may paraphrase his views. And this is the only reference to Göbekli Tepe. And this is interesting, and I wanted to just focus on this because this is a good example of how... hey, guys, you go and talk to him, by all means. Point him at this if you want. I'm sure they'll see it. I'm sure I'll get a few... I'll probably get some feedback for this. It's fine. That's what I'm doing it for. But when it comes to Göbekli Tepe, sorry, I know I say that wrong all the time. This is an interesting comment, right? This is something. I just want to read this little paragraph here. Hancock and others carefully select a minimal sets of data points, remove them from their context, and present them through a carefully contrived lens that distorts the meaning and significance of the original data in order to prop up their claims. Interesting statement. Apply it to the following about Göbekli Tepe. This strategy has been used to great effect with reference to the site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, as a site without evidence for agriculture, built by mobile hunter-gatherers between the 10th and 9th millennia BC. Contemporaneous with pre-pottery Neolithic A, the architecture found at Göbekli Tepe represents an important and rare example of monumental construction in the context of a hunter-gatherer society. The archaeological community began to adjust its expectations of what mobile hunter-gatherer life ways and landscapes might look like. Do you see what they've done here? And this is actually what Sherman did this in the podcast as well. They couldn't refute the date of Göbekli Tepe, right? They argued against it forever. Klaus Schmidt, the guy who's sadly passed on, who did all that excavation, the German Archaeological Institute, 20 years of work, probably more on that site. Incredible find, right? Largest megalithic site in the world in terms of space and huge what's under the ground there. Giant megaliths, it's a big site. People know about Göbekli Tepe. How do they fit this into their worldview? You talk about carefully selecting things and removing them from their context and putting them in through a lens that distorts reality and puts it into their worldview. They've just adjusted what they mean when they say hunter-gatherer. It's not civilization. No. It's hunter-gatherers that also had a hobby of building megaliths. There's no civilization. There's no agriculture and all this other stuff. It's absolute horse poop. It's unbelievable that that's the explanation. And this is what Sherman said as well in that podcast. This is how they fit it into their worldview, that, no, civilization didn't start until later. Göbekli Tepe was simply hunter-gatherers that they liked playing with stones, I guess. It's complete garbage. You cannot build a site that large without civilization. You cannot build megaliths like that without years of training. These are in high relief, like chiseling the stuff out of stone. The megaliths are carved into the stone the imagery and all of that comes out of the stone, let alone the analysis that Martin Sweatman's done that shows that this is actually astronomically significant. All of the stuff at Göbekli Tepe seems to be recording astronomical events. There's all sorts of evidence for it. There's all sorts of research that needs to be done on it. And to suggest that this was nothing more than roving bands of hunter-gatherers that also like to play with rocks occasionally is super disingenuous. Yet they accuse Hancock of doing that exact same thing, trying to fit it into their worldview. It's kind of nonsense. I can't believe it. But that's the tactic. That's the tactic and the technique that they use to talk about this stuff. It cracks me up. I mean, you can't explain Göbekli Tepe in the context of hunter-gatherers. I'm sorry, that's not a hunter-gatherer site. Now, you might say, there's no agriculture here. Who the hell knows if there was grass growing 12,000 years ago? And that was like the earliest state for that site. He was deliberately buried. Place could have been there for thousands of years before that. We don't know. It's utter nonsense to try and squeeze that into the hunter-gatherer hypothesis and then accuse others of trying to squeeze it into their worldviews. Silliness, right? So this is the I don't believe I know article where they accuse essentially archaeology and pseudo-archaeology, pseudoscience as being a religion, as in we can't, it's all a belief that you have to have. Now, this is where it gets into that part where I was talking about why they behave the way they do. It's because, look, archaeology, anthropology is not a hard science. We have to think about what it is. It's a difficult science, right? It's a loose interpretation of incomplete evidence. We find stuff, we have fragments of evidence, just tiny pieces, and from this collection of very limited evidence, we build an entire story. That's how we construct the picture of human history. It's how we construct the picture of human civilization. Now, what it comes down to is that that's a story. Like, there's multiple ways to interpret that evidence. You go watch the rest of my channel, I'm interpreting a lot of that evidence in a different way. Where I focus on technology, there's a lot of different aspects of it and interesting aspects of it where I think it makes sense to interpret it in a different way. And then you have things like the Younger Dryas, Göbekli Tepe, Bluefish Caves, all these other things that actually support some of these alternative worldviews. It's not a religious belief. It's an interpretation of evidence. But why these guys are so aggressively against it, I think, is that it's not a hard science, right? There's no real experimentation, hypotheses and results. It's not a solid science. So when you're in a position of authority, when you're a professor at Kansas State, when you're making your living in these establishment infrastructure, you're doing that based on your position as an expert in that story. You're the guy weaving that story. You've got the textbooks. You're telling the story. You're teaching the students the story, right? You're showing how your evidence and the archaeological evidence supports your story. When something comes along and threatens that story, as things like the Younger Dryas does, as things like Göbekli Tepe does, as things like Bluefish Caves, Saruti Mastodon site, as all of these things threaten that story, they react very defensively. You're not just threatening the story, you're threatening their livelihood, right? You're threatening their ability to make money. You're pulling the rug out from under them and saying, well, there's some fundamental issues with this and we need to reevaluate the whole thing. That's why you get such a hostile result, a response, I think, is that, and it's why it seems like they're very unwilling to engage on some of the facts. And the problem for them is that all of this stuff is coming from scientific disciplines adjacent to archaeology and anthropology, right? It's coming from all these other areas, all this other stuff, technologists, engineers. You want to go argue with Chris Dunn about the precision on the Serapeum or the evidence for high technology in ancient Egypt. Go argue with Randall Carlson about the Younger Dryas and the scientific evidence behind that. For that matter, go and argue with any of the people in the Comet Research Group that are doing the primary work. It's an insecurity that relates to their positions of authority, and I think at some human level they get threatened by this new stuff, so you get this bad reaction, right? That's in a nutshell what it is. And in that way, these people are the priests of that story. They're the clergy of that story, right? In the same way that religious dogma and doctrine is protected by the church, and anyone who attacks it gets viciously attacked back. You are what you say they are. By calling pseudo-archaeology or religion. I mean, you're almost admitting that what the position they're coming from is the dogmatic position, at least in my opinion. I don't see the alternative sciences as being locked into any rigid worldview. If anything, in fact, the alternative guys are far too willing to accept new ideas and new things without really rigorous evidence. You know, like there's a new theory every week about things come. I'm not sure that at all, we can support it all, but certainly new ideas get openly accepted and adopted in that in the overall alternative community, you want to call it. Jordan Rainbow, €5 or pounds, I think. Thanks, mate. Bedtime early. Bedtime, sadly. Work starts tomorrow. Hope to watch the rest later. Cheers. Thanks, Jordan. Thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Thanks for tuning in. I hope my ranting wasn't too bad for you. And yeah, the rest of this will be up on YouTube for all eternity, I think, unless they shoot me down. I hope not. But that's I think that's the reality of the situation in terms of how these mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists kind of react to it. And look, it's not, I think they get threatened by the discourse that happens outside of the academic circles now. They used to be able to control where the discourse happens. And in fact, I gave a good example here on this Twitter page is something that I wanted to show earlier. But so this was in response to the Graham Hancock thread about them being mad. And this is from Majik Stoll, who's an archaeologist, I guess, from South America or something. But she says that, no, we are pissed because Graham Hancock misrepresents archaeological research while relying on our data to push his grift. Here's a good example, right? This idea that it's our data. Now, I hate to tell you, Majik, but I'm sorry, I probably murdered the name, Miss Stoll, that it's not your data. When you publish it, like that's the nature of it, right? You put it out in the public domain, your data is open to be interpreted. Like it's not your data, and that's kind of this ancient hangover has called that out specifically, saying that this is a pathetic, myopic approach to the idea of shared knowledge. Absolutely agree with it. And your high horse is a small pony, and by the way, the GIF here is hilarious. This little pony prancing along. Yeah, good example, right? It's not your data. I mean, you could take the next step, make it like a real religion, do what the church does, just bundle it up in the Vatican archives, like create your own archives. So the only way you can get in there to see that is if you take the solemn oath to like, I swear that I shall never believe in any pseudoscience. I will only adhere to the mainstream belief of what is written in the textbooks. And then you can come in and access our data, right? At least they're not doing that. That's the way that the Vatican works. You've got to take the blood oath of adherence to all of the rules and the belief. You've got to be inoculated against wrongthink, which is the entire purpose of this SAA attack on Hancock, right? It's trying to inoculate people against wrongthink. Unbelievable. Anyway, so in short, I don't. Noel Sharp, get over it. These turkeys are taking you away from your great work. I'm working on my great work. Don't worry about that. I'm not spending a lot of time doing this. That's why I'm doing it in a live stream. I thought about doing this in a video and spending time sort of editing it together, but I just want to do a bit of research and talk about it. It's just, I try not to focus on the mainstream response. I had to say something when I read this. I found the dog whistling aspects of it to be so annoying, and I just wanted to shine a light on it, like I wanted to respond. Trust me, this isn't going to be the focus of what I'm doing. I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing and going down, my path on my analysis. And hopefully you guys will support me doing that. That's it's a big part of it. It's the way that I'm able to do it. So anyway, that's the end of talking about all this. I think I think that's the end of the articles. Yeah, it is. But it's 27 pages of strawman attacks, ad hominems attacking Graham's character and cherry-picking one or two little things that he does talk about in his book. But they left out an awful lot, right? There's an awful lot that is behind what he's doing. And, hey, I'd recommend you read this for yourself. The link to it is below. Get a copy of Graham's book. Have a read of that. And make up your own mind, which is what Graham says as well. He certainly doesn't need me to defend him. Let's see. Okay. Let me pull up what else I was going to do here. Live stream. All right. Let's do some Q&A. I've been going for 2 hours. I didn't know this would go that long, but I have a couple of questions here from. Is that showing up? So a couple of questions from Patreon, and I will try to pay a tighter attention to chat here as well. So a couple of questions from my patrons, or just comments that and things that I've received. So Carl wrote one question. He says, the only question that continues to nag at me is whether or not the dynastic Egyptians discovered the pre-dynastic remnants, as the Inca claimed to have discovered Cusco, or if they were survivors who eventually rebuilt/remodeled their society on that of their ancestors. No worries either way. Thank you for consistently excellent work. Cheers. Thanks for the question, Carl. While we're here, I'll press this button, get a little bigger. By the way, check out the logo. Thanks to Stephanie, one of my patrons, one of the people that I talk to a lot in Discord, for the awesome work on digging up the new logos. She's made this beautiful little pyramid headdress motif that's in the picture now. But in terms of this question about whether I think that they discovered the pre-dynastic remnants, I think that's the case. It's a lot of the... I think that they did discover a lot of... I think they did inherit a lot of the megalithic remnants that we find in Egypt. And I also think that they were tightly connected, or at least had some knowledge of the precursor civilization. I think they did build their model on those people. That's in fact what the Egyptians themselves said. They call themselves a legacy civilization. They trace their own history back some 30,000+ years. It's listed in the Turin Papyrus list, the King's list at Abydos. Excuse me. They did both. I don't think you can, as Yusuf Awan says, I don't think you can separate the builders from them. One of the things that it's a subtle point, but it's something that I want to explore it more in future videos, is that I also think that they inherited a lot of the really perfect megalithic statues, the giant just perfection of stuff that you find at Luxor, at Granite, these massive 100-ton statues. You know, I think they inherited those along with the slabs, the boxes, the megalithic works, the granite temples, the Sphinx. So what you're seeing in those statues is essentially an artistic representation of that builder culture, I think. And I think that the Egyptians modeled themselves after it. I mean, we see that in their artwork. They're definitely a continuation of that culture. That's the short answer. I think you get a bit of both in Egypt. And I think that the idea of inheritance, it explains a lot of the mysteries that we see, right? All of the fact that it's the oldest layers that are the most complex, or the most massive, the most technologically advanced. I think they build on top of it. It's something that I expand a bit on in the next My Doom video that I'm working on, because My Doom's an interesting case. I'm not sure that the pyramid there actually falls into that category. It might, but it's much rougher work than the things that are around it, particularly like the chamber underneath Mastaba 17, as well as all of the other sculptured tombs that they found. They found dozens and dozens of these underground megalithic chambers at My Doom. It's all buried still now, but. You know, what's interesting there is that although they say My Doom is the second pyramid built after the Step Pyramid, I think both the Step Pyramid and My Doom may have come a little later. Like, they may have been works by the early dynastic Egyptians, but they might have been based on, if you assume that the other pyramids, the Red Pyramid, the Bent, the pyramids at Giza, the perfect massive ones, if they were there, they may have been trying to emulate those pyramids by building the Step Pyramid, then by building the My Doom Pyramid, because it's so rough. It's just an idea. It's a hypothesis, something I explore in the next video, but it's a possibility, I think. Do I think we share DNA with the builders of the pyramids? It's possible. If we ever find more ancient human remains, then there's something we could do. I know that the oldest human actual Homo sapien remains was found in Morocco. I think we're talking 300,000+ years ago. And I don't know if there's been a DNA or genome analysis done to it. Sometimes it's hard to extract actual DNA. DNA breaks down over time. It can be quite difficult to extract and actually analyze in really old stuff. So ancient history criticisms is saying that Step Joseph Pyramid has been expanded also. Indeed it has. Yeah, so I think that's a case where I think the stuff underneath that pyramid may have been there originally. and then they built that on top of it over time. I mean, my Doom to me looks like it's been done in several periods of construction, and in fact, that's what Petrie says about it as well. And I get into that. So let's grab another question here. From Zacko Zapinch on Patreon says, one thing I'd like is your take on the underwater city of Dwarka, twice the size of Manhattan, dated at 36,000 years, and is exactly as described in the Mahabharata. It was destroyed by flood and is underwater off the west coast of India. The Indian archaeologists know it's there, and they accept that it's biblical, the biblical Dwarka, and are therefore satisfied, and there is no need for further archaeology. It's pretty fascinating and a known thing at the new city of Dwarka, which is also home to one of the oldest temples to a god. I saw a YouTube doc where a guy went to Dwarka and asked questions about it with government officials. He eventually walked onto the shore near where the city would be, and artifacts are all over the beach. I'm sure you know this, but not many do. The history of the destruction of Dwarka is weirdly similar, though far more detailed, to Atlantis. Good question. Dwarka is an interesting site. I think this is the same thing that Graham Hancock talks about. It's up there off the coast of India, I think near Pakistan. Somewhere like that up there. I'm not sure exactly. But what's interesting is that it's underwater, and it is miles long from what I understand. And it wasn't really until the tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami of 2000 and something. I can't remember exactly when that was. I should know because I was very nearly a part of that. At 26th of December, they had that giant earthquake that killed hundreds of thousands of people. Well, the tsunamis did, Sri Lanka and Pakistan and whatnot. I was in Thailand. I'd actually, just a short aside, I'll get back to Dwarka, but I was actually supposed to be in Thailand. I was living in Singapore at the time, and my dad was visiting us, and we were gonna be in Phuket on the beach when Phuket got smashed, right, by the tsunami. And we couldn't get into like a hotel. There was some reason something was full. We couldn't book in, so we changed our plans last minute. Ended up going to Bintan, which is an island in Indonesia, and it was sort of protected by the peninsula, and we didn't have any effect from the tsunami there. But there was a real good chance that I would have been part of all the fun in Phuket, unless we did change our plans at last minute, which was just fortune, I guess. But yeah, it wasn't until that tsunami that when the sea pulled out. Before the tsunami came back in, that a lot of the city was exposed. It's off the coast of India, and one of the things that, of course, interesting about that is that we know when the sea levels rose, right? It wasn't until the Younger Dryas period, and even before that, 15,000 BC, that we started to see massive sea level rises. Ever since then, we've had bugger all sea level rise. I think it's millimeters in the last sort of 10, 12,000 years. So it must have been a large city that was kilometers long, that was built at some point before that for it to be a city that's underwater today. And that's probably one of the reasons that people don't want to go and investigate it. Graham Hancock talks about it as being someone that had something to do with, he might have dove on it even, and then he got kicked out. Like he was told not to look at the site and do anything. It's one of the things he talks about in one of his lectures. See, I think Dwarka is super interesting. India in general is super interesting. There's, Praveen, I forget his Mohan, I think, but he has a great channel, big channel on YouTube, does a great job looking at a lot of the sort of evidence for high technology and some of the artwork and all of the stonework that's in all of these ancient Indian temples. And India's full of megaliths. It's full of foundation, just giant work into the rock. I've been to India a bunch of times, but I'm way back in the day in the old career, and I didn't get much of a chance to go and see things, just a couple of the usual sort of things in Delhi and whatnot, the Taj and all that. But it's a place that I'd love to get back to and do. It's on my list. So on that list actually. So next year I'm working on a trip to Egypt, looking for late November, early December. Also an extension to Lebanon and Baalbek. Nothing official yet. You'll see it announced on the channel and on my website when I get the chance. I'm going to open that up for people, trying to keep it to a small group. I may be letting a little cat out of the bag here by saying that I'm going to run that. Looks like I'm running it jointly with Matt from Ancient Architects. So we're going to do this together. So it'll be quite an interesting first trip. I'm sure there'll be a bit of demand to get on it. He hasn't been there for a long time, and he's looking forward to the chance to go. So we've been talking about that. So stay tuned for an announcement. As soon as I get the itinerary and everything nailed down, I'm working on it right now, back and forth with the Commit School. It will be with Yusuf, and hopefully it'll be with, I'll definitely be there, and Matt looks like he's going to be there too, which would be great. Small group, 25, 30 people max. You know, you could do a bigger tour. I've been on the bigger tours. I think 25, 30 is the best sort of size group to then allow you to spread the cost of some special permissions across a group, because it is expensive to get into a few of these sites and do a few of the really cool things. Like, I'm really looking forward to a number of things like the Bent Pyramid they've opened up, the Step Pyramid they say they've done with the renovations, so getting into both of those. The Osiris Shaft on the Giza Plateau that's 100 feet down, 3 different levels. I've not been in there. Brian Forrester has some great footage from down there. I'm dying to get in there. Doing things like renting out the Great Pyramid for a couple of hours and opening up all those chambers. And of course the Nile cruise and spending a bunch of time on the boat visiting all the sites up and down the Nile, Luxor and Aswan, and all that sort of stuff is just going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned for that. But I'm also hopefully I would love to run a trip to South America mid next year, maybe third quarter, something like that. That's an idea. It'll probably come together a little more quickly because South America is a little cheaper for most people to get down there. I've been there more than I've been to Egypt. I'm more familiar with it. I've got contacts down there. I'd love to try and do something with Brian. It's going to depend on his availability. I need to speak to him about that. I've been a little slack lately. But yeah, other things than that are Japan, India. There's a bunch of other places that are on that list that I don't know if it'll be next year, but maybe the year after. All places that I'd love to get there. Brian's in the chat. How you doing, Brian? I'd owe you a call on Skype, Brian. I know you were probably booked out for years in advance at this point, but I do want to talk to you about it. And I will follow up on Skype. I've been super busy and a little ill lately, but if you're out there, I will hit you up on Skype pretty soon and just get your thoughts on that. So that's something that I'm looking forward to next year. So let me look at one more comment here. We can see it. Move it up a bit. I just wanted to call this out from Doug Zork on Patreon. I thought this was a great comment he sent me. 25th day of November, 12,819 anno post Younger Dryas boundary cataclysm. Let's reset contemporary civilization's year zero. Anno Domini references a narrow cultural episode in a foreshortened history. Anno post Younger Dryas boundary cataclysm focuses our attention on the critical issue of understanding who we are, where we came from, and how to increase humanity's odds of surviving the next cataclysm. Uncharted X indeed. Thank you for that great comment, Doug. That's I love that idea. We should be doing our dating system by that. I like that idea. I think I'd love it if we could do that, right? I think humanity needs to change our priorities to focus on things like this. George Howard, I don't think he was being sort of what would you say, overexcited when he says it's probably the most important scientific discovery of our time. I agree. I think it's just a tremendously important aspect of the recent past of humanity. It really has just bounced us back into the Stone Age, gave our species amnesia, and it's a giant warning to us of the future. And I think the more people that understood, I think the nature of the true threat to humanity, the more people that put that into the context of modern lives and our future, then the better chance we have of doing something about it. And I think the better chance we have of actually getting over some of our own little petty difficulties and petty differences here, wasting our time fighting wars with each other and worrying about money and all this other nonsense. I mean, you need money to live, I know, but yeah, I mean, I feel like we could definitely do a little better by changing our priorities in general as we go. Hey, yeah, I can see Brian talking in there. Yeah, Brian, and I got to say, I'm loving the new videos. I love the fact that you share so much with everybody. Like your videos have given me the best look at a number of sites that I've never seen for myself, and that's just such a tremendous thing to be able to give to everyone. There's hundreds of thousands of people get to see sites that you'd never see otherwise, and it's all in 4K and stabilized cameras now. It's just that the advent of that consumer technology, the ability to be able to go and do that yourself as a punter now was one of the major reasons I got into this space. I thought that there was a chance to start doing some of this work by traveling and filming and capturing this stuff and then giving it a modern twist or analysis with a modern twist. And the ability to film all of this stuff is a huge part of it, to share that. So, yeah, cheers. I really appreciate the stuff you're doing. So let me look at one other thing that I was going to do here. Make this a bit of size. All right. Let's see chat. How have I been going? 2.5 hours? I think it's probably pretty good. My voice is starting to give up on me a little bit. I would, yeah, Brian, can you do a vlog with Randall and Graham? That'd be cool too, hey. Actually, speaking on that note, I am remiss. I do need to contact Randall. I have his number. I'd like to get him on the show. I have interviewed Brian on the old channel, Puka J, and I'd love to chat again, Brian, actually. So that's another thing I'll talk to you about when I hit you up on Skype. Thanks. Yeah, I would love to have another talk and do another episode of the podcast with you on this channel. And so I've got a few of those coming up. I mean, I'm planning. I haven't got them scheduled just yet, but Randall is on my list. I just had it, like I said, I just had a interaction and back and forth with Graham, and he's promised me some time, I think around March. So hopefully we'll get that done. Yeah, Chuck may be busy. I've been speaking with Chuck. He's around. I've been meaning to do another video with Chuck as well. I like hanging out with him and doing videos. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, otherwise, I think we can call it pretty much. It's been great. Let me just SEK50 from Bootman. Thank you for the super chat. Cheers. Question asks, how much archaeological discoveries the Vatican hides in those archives? Any thought on Jim Vieira's work? I feel like a kid listening to forbidden stuff. Cheers. Thanks for the super chat. Really appreciate it. How many archaeological discoveries the Vatican hides in the archives? It's a very good question. I wish I knew. It's like I did say for a while, there was that stupid hashtag people were worrying about, like, let's go storm Area 51. I was like, don't do that. Let's storm the Vatican archives. Like, that's what I think we should be looking at. I mean, who knows how much is hidden down in there, but they've been at it for quite a while. The whole Father Crespi story is an interesting one to look up. If ever you want to get an idea of how that worked, I mean, Father Crespi I think it was Ecuador. He was a priest, a Catholic priest that lived there with the community his whole life, and the people trusted him, and they would bring him artifacts that were from allegedly undiscovered caves and areas and stuff. And once he died, they shipped in a new priest, and he sort of had an idea of what he was on, and they bundled the whole lot up and put it into the Vatican archives and never to be seen again. I think there's no end of stuff down there that would be just revelatory when it comes to history and whatnot. I mean, that's also the speculation about giant bones, right? All of the evidence, or where are all the giant bones and giant skulls? How many does the Vatican have? I'd love to know. I mean, my opinion on giants, we need to see some bones, but a lot of people tell you that they're all in the Vatican archives. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on, but it's nothing more than speculation on my part. Here's a quick question I see here. I see so many comments on videos regarding the pyramids where it said the evidence shows that they are 4.5 thousand years old. How can this be with all the evidence suggest otherwise? Yeah, good question. I'm not sure what evidence there is that suggests they're 4.5 thousand years old. In the same way that they apparently there's all this evidence that suggests they're tombs. I'm yet to see any real evidence that does show that they're tombs. It feels like some sort of cognitive dissonance. Like we've all been sold a story that these things are tombs, and we all just believe it. Silliness. No such evidence exists. And I mean, actually, Matt at Ancient Architects has a good couple of videos on some of the really strange and odd results they've had from trying to do some of the new tests in terms of luminescence testing on the stone and trying to date it. And they've taken it for some odd areas, and they get all sorts of weird, different results. Who's to say? I can only say that I hope that they do more testing. And I hope that they find more modern methods for figuring these things out. Like I said before, the whole cosmic ray testing stuff and all the way that they're doing the muon detectors and things that they're doing in the Great Pyramid, they should be doing that stuff in other pyramids too. I think they'd find a lot. I think there's lots of ways to find a bunch of information at these places. Like Petrie, I was surprised to say, Ian Gifford, $5, great broadcast. Thanks for the super chat, Ian. Good to see you here, mate. Cheers. Yeah, Ian's been. I hope I can drag you back into the realm of archaeology and ancient stuff occasionally. I know you pop in and out of it sometimes, you say, but I'm glad to see you here, mate. Cheers. Back to the Mydoom Pyramid, Petrie, in his books says that there's he points to some direct evidence that suggests there are other chambers in the upper parts of that structure. He couldn't get up there. He described it as inaccessible, and I get into some of that evidence in this next video that I'm going to be working on this evening. I will take a little break for probably an hour or so. I've got some chores to run, but and then after that I will be on Twitch later on. So I will be streaming and just editing and chatting on Twitch if you're interested. So you can catch me on my Twitch channel. There's a link to that on my website. There's a link to that, I think, in my about, and I'll add it to the description after this is done. But he had some really pretty interesting evidence that pointed towards other chambers that may be in the Mydoom Pyramid. And I think this may be the case for a lot of these structures. I think being able to do things like muon detectors and these void detectors, I think there's no end of practical applications when it comes to these ancient sites that we should be looking at. So, cheers, Brian. I see you there. Ask Elon to fund a sub for offshore archaeology. Yeah, seriously. I think that's when you get to Dwarka and whatnot. That's where we should be looking. And in fact, I did tweet about it. There is, I don't know if you've noticed, but there is, as far as drone technology has come along in terms of flying around, there is now some really awesome submersible drones. They'll go down to like 300 meters, or 100 plus meters, 300 plus feet, which is bang on as deep as you need to go for looking for evidence of civilization in that sort of ice age sea level area. You don't need to go any deeper than that. There's 10 million square miles of it. The problem is where to look. But there has been a lot of advancement in these underwater submersible drones. I think that would be really interesting. Like I think you could actually, with a minimal investment, go out and do some of that stuff. And look in some of these places and get some interesting footage. It's an idea that I've had. It was a TV show. Some TV people approached me for a show, and I've been through an audition loop. I haven't heard anything. I suspect nothing's ever going to happen of it. But that's one of the ideas. I think you could definitely. It would be interesting to go and look in a few of these places. Rather than having to dive. I mean, I can do diving, but you can't dive to 300 feet. That's too deep. But underwater submersibles with 4K and stuff, and go down for a couple hours. I think that's a great idea. Looks cold here. It's not too bad. It's getting there. But anyway, I can see that people are dropping off. I'm kind of out of steam here. I didn't get around to reviewing the raw footage from Mydoom. Maybe I'll do that over on Twitch. So if you're interested, give me an hour or so. But I will be on Twitch. I'll throw it up on my website, and if you go and sign up on Twitch, you'll see the notification for it there. But I'm going to do some editing and pop up on Twitch a little later on. But thank you everyone for tuning in. I appreciate the party we have over here. I like talking. I hope you found it useful. Hope you found it entertaining. As always, I'm not trying to attack any of these guys personally. I just wanted to respond to their publication. Again, not something that Graham needed me to do. In fact, I was mostly focusing on their approach for everything. So if you do go and engage with them, you do what you want. I can't control what people do, but yeah, I would just recommend doing anything respectfully. It seems like Hoops and those folks are willing to engage. So I can only hope that there'll be some podcasts and some actual debate, and maybe we'll be able to move that discussion forward. A little skeptical as to whether or not it's actually going to happen, but we'll see. And I am working on that video. I'm sorry that it's been so long since I've published. I've got a few things piled up. I'm planning on getting a bunch of work done, a bunch of videos done before the end of the year. I want to do a channel retrospective. It's been a big year for me, so I'll get that done. Then, in any case, I'm going to leave it there. You guys take it easy. I'm going to fade out and figure out a way to play some music. But, yeah, you guys enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers. I'm going to make this logo nice and big. Just play a song out. Peace out, everyone.
And you've been to Giza, though?
No, I've never been to Giza.
Oh, dear.
Shame on you!
Thanks, guys.
Because I don't believe in it.
Everybody said that it needs to be updated with new chambers. It may well need to be, right?
I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist. I don't waste my time.
And you've been to Giza, though?
No, I've never been to Giza.
Oh, dear.
Shame on you! Could they have no shop? Could they have no shop? Because I don't believe in it.
And you've been to Giza, though?
No, I've never been to Giza.
Oh, dear.
Peace out, guys. I'm pressing the button. Bye-bye.